Hi, good morning everyone. Okay, so we have covered the right to equality under Article 14 to 18 of the Indian Constitution. We will discuss now about Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. So we have right to freedom that has been provided under the Indian Constitution from Article 19 to Article 22. And the first and very significant article of the Indian Constitution, a very important provision, is Article 19 of the Constitution. So let's have a look at what all is there in Article 19 first, and then we will have a detailed discussion. Right. So Article 19 of the Indian Constitution presently provides 6 freedoms to the citizens in India. Originally, these freedoms were different. There were 7 freedoms that had been provided, but presently there are only 6 freedoms that have been provided. One freedom, that is to acquire, dispose of, and the property has been taken away by the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. We will be having further discussion on that. So when we discuss about Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, what you need to keep in mind is that there are several freedoms that have been provided, but that does not mean that those freedoms are flowing from the Constitution of India. Those freedoms are flowing from the virtue of being a citizen or virtue of being a human being. Those are actually natural rights that have been provided to a person by nature. That is, for example, Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution provides right to freedom of speech and expression. Now that does not mean if the Constitution would not have been there, then people would not have had the right to express themselves in India or would not have had the right to speak in India. But what that essentially means is that Article 19 has been written down in order to limit the powers of the state, so that the state cannot arbitrarily take away the citizens' freedoms that have been provided under Article 19. So try to understand one thing, that Article 19 per se is not providing you and me any freedoms as citizens of India. But what it is doing is that it is restricting the state from taking away those freedoms from us. And even if we do not have an absolute freedom under Article 19(1), but that does not mean that the state can impose any kind of restrictions on our freedom. So what Article 19 is doing is, one, it is telling the state that you cannot arbitrarily take away freedoms of the citizens that have been provided under this article. Secondly, what it is doing is, it is telling that when we talk about Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, all these freedoms can be restricted, because these are not absolute rights, these are not absolute freedoms, but they can be restricted only to a certain extent only. So two things are important. One, that it limits the right of the state or the power of the state to limit your and my rights that have been provided under Article 19. That is what Article 19 does. Secondly, it tells us that your and my rights under Article 19 are not absolute in nature and they can be restricted, but they can be restricted only in a limited manner by the state. So even the powers of the state to impose restrictions on your and my freedoms under Article 19 have been restricted. This is very important to understand, because a lot of times people confuse that Article 19 per se is providing you and me the freedom to move or the freedom to reside or the freedom to speak freely. That's a wrong conception. Article 19 का वो ऑब्जेक्टिव है ही नहीं, वो तो स्टेट की पावर्स को लिमिट करने के लिए है. अगर आप और मैं इंडिया के सिटीजन नहीं होते तो क्या हमारे पास यहां पे बोलने की आजादी नहीं है? क्या हम बोल नहीं सकते थे? ऑफ कोर्स बोल सकते थे. बट आर्टिकल 19 ये कह रहा है कि ये जो बोलने की आजादी है, इसको स्टेट को रिस्ट्रिक्ट करने का जो पावर है वो बहुत लिमिटेड है, और स्टेट केवल आर्टिकल 19 के अकॉर्डिंग ही किसी सिटीजन की इस फ्रीडम को रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर सकता है. So the state can restrict Article 19 freedom only as per Article 19 only. So that is what we need to understand by the crux of Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. Now when we look at Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, there are various freedoms that have been provided. And there are 6 clauses which are there in Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. The first clause is very important because it is in first clause, that is 19(1), where we find the various freedoms that have been provided to the citizens of India. So first clause, for example, has been further subdivided into sub-clauses which provide various types of freedoms to the citizens. For example, Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution provides the freedom of speech and expression. But keep it in mind that the language of Article 19 of the Indian Constitution is such that this right is available only to the citizens of India. Because if you read Article 19, it talks that it's a right that has been provided to citizens. All the citizens shall have the freedom. So when it means citizen, it means citizen. This right is not available to a non-citizen. What that basically means is, it does not mean that if a American citizen comes to India, he or she cannot speak. But what it means is that they can speak, but the state can also impose restrictions on their freedom of speech and expression in India. And in that case, they cannot use Article 19 to say that the state has imposed unreasonable or arbitrary restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression provided under Article 19(1)(a). So 19(1)(a) is freedom of speech and expression. Similarly, if you read 19(1)(b), it provides the right to freedom of assembly. That is, right to assemble peacefully and without arms. Right? Similarly, if you look at the other freedoms as well in Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. So let's read Article 19 of the Constitution once, and then we will be able to understand it better. So Article 19 states that protection of certain rights regarding freedom of speech, etc., etc. So what Article 19 is doing is, it is providing protection to certain rights related to some freedoms that we have as citizens. So Article 19 states that all the citizens shall have the right. So as I just explained, this right is available only to the citizens of India, not to the non-citizens. All the citizens shall have the right, and first it says, to the freedom of speech and expression. Second, it says, to assemble peacefully and without arms. C, it says, to form associations or union. D, clause D says, to move freely throughout the territory of India. E says, to reside and settle in any part of territory of India. F has been deleted from the Indian Constitution by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. And then we have 19(1)(g), which provides the freedom to all the citizens in India to practice any profession or to carry any occupation, trade or business. So when we see Article 19, what we see is that there are various subclauses that have been provided under Article 19(1) of the Indian Constitution, and all of them are providing certain freedoms to the citizens. 19(1)(a) is providing freedom of speech and expression. 19(1)(b) is providing freedom of assembly peacefully without arms. C is providing right to form associations. D and E are closely related to each other. D is providing right to move or right to movement throughout the territory of India. And of course, if you are moving, then you have the right to reside and settle somewhere as well. So right to reside in any part of India, Article 19(1)(e), and then right for profession, occupation, business, etc. has been provided under Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution. Now what about the other clauses of Article 19? So there are clauses from Article 19 clause 2 to clause 6 of the Constitution. So Article 19.2 and 19.6, from 19.2 to 19.6, 19.2, 19.3, 19.4, 5, 6, provide the grounds on the basis of which restrictions may be imposed by the state on the exercise of these freedoms provided under Article 19. What you need to keep in mind is that all these freedoms that have been provided under Article 19 are not absolute in nature. They are not absolute in nature. Because see, if these freedoms were absolute in nature, then it would become a problem. Someone would say that I have right to movement through the entire territory of India, so I will move through your house, right? Provide me a way through your house, and then I will only go to my office when I will enter your door, and then I will take an exit from your back door. Are you getting what I am trying to say? This cannot be absolute freedom. Similarly, Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution, it says that you have freedom of speech and expression. What that basically means is that this is also restricted. You cannot be abusing someone. You cannot be defaming someone. You cannot be hurting someone's religious sentiments. You cannot be trying to promote enmity between two communities in India, considering India is a multi-religious, multi-diverse and multi-ethnic society. So the point which we need to keep in mind is that these freedoms that have been provided in Article 19(1) are not absolute. And what Article 19(2) to 19(6) of the Constitution do is that they provide grounds on the basis of which reasonable restrictions may be imposed by the state on these freedoms. And there is a matrix kind of a look which Article 19 of the Indian Constitution has, which basically is that Article 19(1)(a) can be restricted on the basis of the grounds that have been provided in Article 19(2) of the Constitution. Article 19(1)(b) of freedom to assembly can be restricted on the basis of the grounds provided in Article 19(3) of the Constitution. Freedom to form associations can be restricted on the basis of the grounds provided in 19(4). Right to movement and residence can be restricted on the basis of the grounds provided in 19(5). And right to freedom of trade, profession, occupation and business can be restricted on the basis of the grounds provided in 19(6) of the Constitution. So the overall structure of Article 19 is something like this. There is a matrix approach, which is basically meaning that ये जो सारी freedoms Article 19 में provided है, 19(1) में different freedoms जो provided हैं, इन सब के ऊपर reasonable restrictions लगाई जा सकती हैं. Reasonable restrictions can be imposed on all of these freedoms provided under Article 19(1) on the basis of the grounds mentioned in 19(2), 19(3), 19(4), 19(5) and 19(6) correspondingly. What that means is that the powers of the state, इसका ये भी मतलब है, powers of the state to impose restrictions on these freedoms is itself limited. No doubt that our fundamental rights are not absolute under Article 19. But at the same time, even the powers of the state to impose restrictions on your and my freedoms under Article 19 are not absolute in nature. They are themselves limited, and they are limited by Article 19 itself. Is this clear to everyone? These are two important things that we need to understand about Article 19 of the Indian Constitution before we proceed any further. बिकॉज बार बार मैं ये समझाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूं, आर्टिकल 19 एक्चुअली लिखने का पर्पस आप और मैं नहीं है. द रीजन टू राइट आर्टिकल 19 इज नॉट टू प्रोवाइड अस फ्रीडम्स पर से, बिकॉज वी हैव फ्रीडम एनीवे, बट it is to provide restrictions on these freedoms, and at the same time it tells that these restrictions that can be imposed by the state themselves are limited. These powers of the state to impose restrictions itself is limited. Is this clear to everyone? Right? Now, let's deep dive further into the first article or first clause of Article 19, and that is 19(1), and in which we will be now first focusing on one of the most important rights and freedom that has been provided to the citizens in India, which is freedom of speech and expression. Okay, so Article 19(1)(a) is what we are going to be discussing now. So Article 19(1)(a) of Indian Constitution provides freedom of speech and expression to all the citizens of India. All the citizens in India have been provided right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. First and foremost, let us try to understand what is the importance of freedom of speech and expression, that it has been provided this protection in the Indian Constitution. And if there has been one provision of Indian Constitution which has attracted so much attention of the courts, which has attracted a lot of attention from the activists, is Article 19(1)(a), because this is one article which has been expanded considerably by the interpretation of the court, because the court says that right to freedom of speech and expression is a very broad right and it includes a number of things. So first and foremost, let's try to understand what is the importance of right to freedom of speech and expression. Yes, why is right to freedom of speech and expression important in a democracy? Please raise your hands and then answer. Yes, sir. To express views. So why is it important to express views in a democracy? Why is it important to express views in a democracy? Yes, democracy is all about participation. Democracy is all about a person being able to express his choice with respect to whom they want to elect, with respect to whom one does not want to elect. The entire concept of democracy rests on the freedom of a person to express himself or herself. Right? Democracy is nothing but democracy is being able to express yourself freely and to be able to disagree with someone, to be able to agree with someone, to be able to express what is going through your mind. So what you can mention is that it is the very basis of democracy. Without expression, democracy has no meaning. Without a person being able to freely express himself or herself, democracy has no meaning, is what we need to understand by the importance of right to freedom of speech and expression. See, the other thing which is also there is, what you can also mention is, that this right has been recognized as a basic as the most basic human right by UN Declaration on Human Rights 1948. So the UN Declaration on Human Rights also recognizes the right to freedom of speech and expression is the most basic human right that is enjoyed by all the citizens. So you have to understand one thing. What differs us from animals is our speech, our expression. Animals do not have speech. Animals are not able to communicate. Yes, of course they have their ways of communication, but they do not have something as solid as language that we possess. The greatest the advancement in mankind has happened because of language. Because it is language only that allows the human beings to develop their intellect. You cannot develop your intellect, you cannot develop your brain to the maximum possible capacity if you do not know a language. It's a very basic thing. अनपढ़ से अनपढ़ आदमी भी जो है वो लैंग्वेज बोलना सीखना जानता है, चाहे उसको पढ़ना नहीं आता हो, चाहे उसको लिखना नहीं आता हो, पर बोलना सबको आता है. बिकॉज ये सबसे बेसिक ह्यूमन ट्रेट है और यही हमें डिफर करता है और जानवरों से. राइट? सी, ह्यूमन बीइंग्स आर आल्सो एनिमल्स, वी आर आल्सो एनिमल्स, राइट? But what differs us from the other animals and why we are at the top of this entire chain or the ecosystem is because we possess language. That is what differs us from human beings. So that's why United Nations Declaration for Human Rights says that this is the most basic human rights, one of the most basic human rights that has been provided to the people. Yes, then why else is freedom of speech and expression important? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so how would you put it in words? How would you say that, what is the importance of freedom of speech and expression? Yes, very good. So, Article 19(1)(a) and freedom of speech and expression is crucial because it allows the citizens to express dissent. It allows the citizens to criticize the government. It allows the citizens to hold the government accountable. If there would not have been right to freedom of speech and expression, the state would have become tyrannical. The state would have become dictatorial. So, this right is very important because it allows the citizens to hold those in power accountable for their actions. So it's a very important tool to hold the government accountable for its actions. In absence of right to freedom of speech and expression, the state would have ended up becoming tyrannical. So you can mention, in its absence, the state would become tyrannical. The state would end up becoming dictatorial in nature if this basic right was not provided to us. Yes, what else? Why else? What else could be justified to talk about the importance of freedom of speech and expression in a democracy? Okay, so again, this is an important right through which people can elect the government, right? Choose whom they want to be in power and not. People can express their political viewpoints, right? So democracy is all about exercise of political rights. It allows citizens to exercise political rights. Without freedom of speech and expression, we would not have been able to utilize the other political rights that have been provided to us. And then see, of course, the importance of freedom of speech and expression is also something which can be seen from the fact that it allows the citizens to provide feedback to the government. The government constantly needs feedback in order to improve its functioning, and that can only happen when right to freedom of speech and expression has been provided, right? Some of the online students are saying that it helps in strengthening the working of democracy. It ensures that the dissenting opinion cannot be suppressed. The dissent is very, very important in democracy. The best of the ideas in the world have only developed when there has been a lot of critical analysis. When people have sit down, when they have played the devil's advocate, they have critically analyzed an idea. That is only when you make an idea very strong. See, if I say that, let's say, I decide today that I want to eat something in dinner. Now, how will I ensure that this, let's say I decide that I want to eat dosa. So, how will I ensure that I embolden this view further? I take a stronger decision on this particular issue, whether I should be eating dosa or whether I should be eating biryani today. That will only be decided if I discuss it with someone. Someone will tell me, no, you should eat dosa, this has this quality, etc. Then I will say, no, I like the taste of biryani better. Then someone will say, no, you don't realize that dosa has this crispy layer, this, that, whatever. Point I am trying to say is that freedom of speech and expression is important because it allows dissent, it allows debate. And it's only out of dissent and it's only out of debate that new ideas are born. New ideas are never born in an echo chamber. अगर मैं अपनी बात अपने आप को बोलता रहूं पूरे दिन, तो उससे कभी भी नया आइडिया जनरेट नहीं होगा. नया आइडिया जनरेट करने के लिए आपको लोगों से बहस करनी पड़ेगी, आपको लोगों से डिबेट करना पड़ेगा, आपको लोगों के व्यू पॉइंट से डिसएग्री करना पड़ेगा, फिर others will explain to you their viewpoint, and that is how a new idea would get accepted and would get generated, right? So these are some of the aspects that can be mentioned by you why freedom of speech and expression is so important in a democracy such as India. Okay, there are several other points that can also be mentioned by you. There is no restriction as such, but these are the major points that can be written by you with respect to freedom of speech and expression. Now, let's try to understand the freedom of speech and expression, what all it actually includes within itself. So, freedom of speech and expression has been given an expansive meaning. Its meaning has been expanded by the various judgments of the courts in India. So what is the expansive meaning? Prima facie तो हमें दिखता है कि it says freedom of speech and expression, which basically should mean that one has right to express themselves either through orally or through written words, right? Primarily that is what it seems, that right to freedom of speech and expression should be the right of a person to be able to express themselves orally, verbally, and through written words. But Supreme Court of India, through its various judgments, has expanded the meaning of right to freedom of speech and expression. The court says that expression through any art form is also a part of right to freedom of speech and expression. That may include music, that may include cinema, it may include paintings, work of art, drama, whatever form of art that you can think is included under the right to freedom of speech and expression provided under Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. It is a very broad article. केवल आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि आपको ओरल और रिटन वर्ड्स के थ्रू एक्सप्रेस करने का राइट है. You have right to express yourself through all these other means of art as well as a person. That is what right to freedom of speech and expression provides to us as citizens. Then right to freedom of press is also flowing from Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. So there are cases which have been there. For example, Sakal Papers versus Union of India. Bennett Coleman, the company that runs Times of India. Bennett Coleman versus Union of India. Indian Express versus Union of India. कुछ न्यूज़पेपर्स के ऊपर रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगाई गई और गवर्नमेंट ने एक ऑर्डर जारी किया कि जो न्यूज़पेपर्स का टोटल नंबर ऑफ पेजेस हैं वो रिस्ट्रिक्ट करे जाए. न्यूज प्रिंट ऑर्डर पास किया, बोला कि देश के अंदर जो न्यूज प्रिंट पेपर है उसकी कमी है जिसके ऊपर पेपर छपता है. एज अ रिजल्ट वी आर पासिंग एन ऑर्डर दैट दी overall length of any newspaper should be restricted below these many number of pages. So then the newspapers went to the Supreme Court of India citing that, sir, there is right to freedom of speech and expression that has been provided under Article 19(1)(a). When the state is passing such a law that there should be restriction on the number of the pages, they are also restricting our revenue as newspapers, because we have to publish news and we have to publish classifieds, we have to publish ads as well, and that is where we earn our money from. एक रुपए का न्यूज़पेपर बेच के थोड़ी ना हमें पैसा मिलता है. We are getting our money from ads, and that is how we are able to sustain ourselves, and that is a part of our right to freedom of speech and expression, right to freedom of press, which is being unreasonably restricted by the state by imposing a limitation on the number of the pages that we can publish in form of a newspaper. So the court agreed. The court said that, see, right to freedom of speech and expression provided under Article 19(1)(a) includes right to freedom of press as well. Okay. Then the court says that, see, with every right comes a negative right as well. So right to freedom of speech and expression that allows a person to express himself or herself freely through oral or written words also includes the right to remain silent. Right to remain silent. Right to remain silent. So if I have the right to express myself through words, I have right to express myself through silence as well. See, silence is also as powerful as speech at times. Right? A lot of times, see, when a girl is approached by a boy and the boy asks her that, would you want to go out with me for a coffee or a tea? If she doesn't reply, that also is an answer for those boys and for those men who don't understand the concept of consent. When she does not reply to your messages, when she does not returns your calls, then that also means that she is expressing something which your duffer mind is not able to gather. Which is basically, I am not interested. Right? Hindi movies, Telugu movies, etc., it's a different scene. Silence is considered as acceptance. But that's not the case. So right to remain silent is also a part of freedom of speech and expression. A case came up in front of Supreme Court of India, and this case is called as Bijoy Emmanuel versus State of Kerala. We will be discussing about this case later on when we will be discussing Article 25 of the Indian Constitution in detail, but this case is also called as the Jehovah's Witness case. So there is a sect within Christianity which is called as Jehovah's Witness. जैसे हर रिलीजन में कुछ कुछ सेक्ट बन गए हैं, ऐसे ही क्रिश्चियनिटी में भी एक सेक्ट है, एक ग्रुप है जो Jehovah's Witness बुलाते हैं अपने आप को. Now the believers of Jehovah's Witness sect have a very strong religious belief that we are not supposed to sing a song, a hymn or a prayer for any other person, for any other entity except the Christ. Except God, we will not sing prayer, we will not sing song, we will not sing any kind of hymn in praise of anyone else. So in Kerala in 1980s, late 1980s, a controversy erupted. See, nowadays also unnecessarily controversies erupt. That time also controversies used to erupt. At that point of time, the pace of eruption of controversies was less because social media was not there. So there were 3 children from Jehovah's Witness sect, those who had gone to a school in Kerala, those who used to attend a government school in Kerala, where in the morning assembly, national anthem would be sung daily. Now on one of these days, they were found to be not singing the national anthem. They were standing quietly there without showing any kind of disrespect, without showing any kind of malice towards the national anthem. They were just standing quietly and they just observed the basic rule which is there, that you are supposed to stand in attention, but they were not singing the national anthem. Now 3 children, 3 school going children, imagine. This becomes a controversy. And people say that these people are anti-national, these people are not singing the national anthem, they are unpatriotic, etc., etc., and blah, 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 and all of those things, as if patriotism can be shown only by singing national anthem, right? So then what happens is that these children were expelled from the school for not following the basic ethos and the basic rules of the school, etc., and so on and so forth. They went to the High Court, stating that this is our intrinsic religious belief, which is protected by Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, which is right to freedom of religion. Secondly, right to freedom of speech and expression also includes the right to not express oneself. When we are just standing there quietly and when we are not singing, we are just remaining quiet, then also we are exercising a right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a). It's not that we are disrupting someone. It's not that we are stopping anyone else from singing the national anthem, or it's not that we are shouting. See, देखिए ये बड़ी hypocrisy की बात है कि हम इंडियंस बड़े एक्साइट हो जाते हैं जब हमें यहाँ पे जब कोई बोलता है कि जी मैं नेशनल एंथम नहीं गाऊंगा या मैं कुछ एक पर्टिकुलर कोई चीज नहीं बोलूंगा और व्हाटएवर. बट हम खुद अमेरिका में जाके अमेरिकन सिटीजन्स बन के, यूरोप में जाके यूरोप के किसी कंट्री के सिटीजन बन के वहां पे अपना झंडा फहराते हैं, हम वहां पे अपना नेशनल एंथम गाते हैं और दूसरी कंट्री के लोगों को कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं होती. सी यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड दिस आल्सो, राइट? हैव यू सीन when our prime minister went to Madison Square, there were Indians all across in Madison Square. They were shouting Bharat Mata ki Jai, they were shouting whatever slogans, they sang the national anthem. Now what if the Americans object and say that see what these Indians are doing, हमारे देश में आके अपने देश का नेशनल एंथम गा रहे हैं, हमारी सिटीजनशिप लेके, हमारे यहां का नमक खा के. आप समझ रहे हैं? हिपोक्रेसी है हमारी, और क्या है ये? हम जब दूसरे देशों में जाते हैं तो हम एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं कि हम वहां पे भी अपना, हम वहां के सिटीजन बन के भी अपना इंडियननेस दिखाएंगे और लोग हमें एक्सेप्ट करें उसके लिए, और वो कर रहे हैं. बट वी हैव अ प्रॉब्लम व्हेन अ पर्टिकुलर पर्सन इन इंडिया, because of whatever reason, says that I will not do this thing or I will not do this thing, we start citing them as anti-national. We say that these people are unpatriotic. We start giving them a certificate of patriotism, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that in this particular case, these children, their plea was rejected by the High Court as well. Then they went to the Supreme Court of India, and Supreme Court of India said that their expulsion was unconstitutional. The order that was made was unconstitutional and that was violative of Article 19(1)(a) as well as Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, because one, these children have an intrinsic religious belief that it is a part of their right to freedom of religion that they will not sing the national anthem because, और ये केवल इंडिया में ऐसा केस नहीं हुआ है Jehovah's Witness का. Jehovah's Witness sect has been in controversy and they have had such cases, legal battles that they have fought across the world. US और ऑस्ट्रेलिया में भी इसको लेकर केसेस आए हैं, where they have fought the cases and they have won. So relying upon these judgments of the Australian and the American courts, Indian court also said that the order that was made by the school was violative of their freedom of speech and expression as well as right to religion. Not only is their right to religion getting violated, but also their right to freedom of speech and expression, which is right to remain silent, is also getting violated. Now see, some people said that what about the law that has been enacted in India, which is called as the Prevention of Insults to National Emblems and Symbols Act. So the court said that, see, if you read the law, it at no point of time says that it is necessary when the national anthem is being played somewhere that you should also sing the national anthem. All that is required is that you should not be disrupting the singing of the national anthem. You should not be in any way trying to disrespect the national anthem. These children were not disrespecting the national anthem when they were standing there quietly. They were only following what their intrinsic religious belief is. And in that they did not hurt anyone. They did not cause any kind of harm to anyone. जब किसी को कोई दर्द नहीं पहुंचाया, किसी को कोई दुख नहीं पहुंचाया, तो why should they be expelled for this particular reason? So the court upheld their contention and ruled against the order of the school for expulsion of these students from the school. So in this case, the court says that right to remain silent is also a part of right to freedom of speech and expression of a citizen. Then similarly, the court in a case called as Naveen Jindal versus Union of India held that right to freedom of speech and expression also includes the right to hoist the national flag. Before this judgment of the court came, and if I am not wrong, this judgment came very recently, it's the 21st century in when this judgment came. Before that, citizens in India were allowed to hoist the national flag only on 3 national holidays. Okay? Only on 3 national holidays could you hoist the flag on the top of your building or etc. and so on and so forth. Otherwise, citizens were not allowed to express themselves freely. See, if I want to, see again, everyone's way of expressing their love to the motherland could be different. For some people, it may be hoisting the national flag. For some people, it may be to sing the national anthem. For some people, it may be chanting some slogans. For some people, it may be actually going and helping out some other people, right? Doing something worthwhile for the society instead of shouting that this person is anti-national, right? So everyone's way of expressing patriotism is different. So when the person approached, Naveen Jindal approached the court. So the case was Naveen Jindal versus Union of India. He approached the court and he said that this right to freedom of speech and expression should also allow me the right to express freely my love for my motherland. And that can come by allowing me to hoist the national flag freely on any day. Why just केवल जो patriotism है वो 3 दिन ही थोड़े ना निकल कर आता है, right? I want to feel patriotic. I want to express my love for my country all 365 days of the year. Why has this basic right been taken away from me? So the court said that right to hoist national flag is also a part of right to freedom of speech and expression. And from here onwards, any citizen of India, if they do not disrespect the national flag and they follow the basic code that is there with respect to the national flag, then they can hoist the national flag any time of the day, any time of the year, and at any place. Of course, you have to follow the basic code that has been provided in the law, otherwise you may be punished for insulting the national flag as well. But until unless you are not doing so, then you have the right to express yourself freely by hoisting the national flag. So if you see that the court is trying to expand the meaning of Article 19(1)(a), the basic meaning is that it gives one right to express oneself through oral and written words, to spoken and written words. But that's not the only thing which is included in this right to freedom of speech and expression. Someone is asking that, sir, what about sketch comics? Everything, any kind of art, any kind of form of art is covered under Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. Similarly, what we also need to keep in mind is that the court says that right to freedom of speech and expression today is not only extended to written or spoken words, but also words that are expressed through new forms of technology. Expression through new forms of technology is also included in right to freedom of speech and expression. For example, if a person is not allowed to use telephone and to express themselves freely over the telephone, अगर state उनके phone tap कर रही है, तो आप किसी के right to freedom of speech and expression को भी violate कर रहे हैं. Similarly, if a person is expressing himself or herself through the medium of internet, that also is included in right to freedom of speech and expression. Okay, so what we need to keep in mind is that there was a case that came up in front of Supreme Court of India, where court said that right to express oneself through internet is included in right to freedom of speech and expression. This case was Shreya Singhal versus Union of India. So in Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, what happened was that two girls were arrested. An arrest was made under Section 66A of the IT Act. Information Technology Act 2000 के अंदर Section 66A है. सेक्शन 66A में ये दो लड़कियों को अरेस्ट किया गया. क्यों किया गया? लेट्स फर्स्ट हैव अ लुक एट सेक्शन 66A ऑफ द आईटी एक्ट एंड देन यू विल बी एबल टू रिलेट एंड अंडरस्टैंड इट बेटर. This is Section 66A of the IT Act. Section 66A states that any person who sends by means of a computer resource or a communication device any information that is grossly offensive or has menacing character, or any information which that person knows to be false, but for the purpose of causing annoyance, inconvenience, danger, obstruction, insult, injury, criminal intimidation, enmity, hatred or ill will persistently by making use of such computer resource or a communication device. So if you send a message to me, if you send a mail to me insulting me, right, saying that whatever you want to say, then you can be held liable under Section 66A of the IT Act. अगर आप किसी भी कंप्यूटर रिसोर्स, कंप्यूटर डिवाइस को यूज करते हुए किसी को मेल भेज दें, किसी को मैसेज भेज दें, आप एसएमएस भेज दें किसी को, राइट? अ गर्ल writes back to the guy that I find you disgusting and that's why I have not been replying to your messages and calls. Stop calling me from now onwards, you are an utter fool. Now someone will say that this has caused annoyance to me, this has caused insult to me, this has intimidated me, this has offensive character and therefore this girl should be tried under Section 66A. So it was a very broad provision that was provided in the law, Section 66A. Now what happened was that when Bal Saheb Thackeray died, one girl posted on her Facebook status, क्योंकि 2 दिन का या 3 दिन का जो भी है स्टेट हॉलिडे डिक्लेयर किया गया था, तो शी सेड कि यार देखो इस आदमी ने जीते जी तो किसी का अच्छा नहीं किया. Right? See, of course, you have to understand that there are a lot of people, those who hold grudge against him as well. Some people may revere him, but what he did to people from UP, Bihar, migrant community in Maharashtra is something which people will never forget. That is also the truth of the matter. Anyway, so people posted some comment, she posted some comment on her Facebook feed that जीते जी इसने किसी का कुछ अच्छा नहीं किया, मर गया तो कम से कम छुट्टी तो मिल गई. So अब किसी ने जाके, उसकी एक फ्रेंड ने भी उसको लाइक कर दिया, तो उसको तो पुलिस ने पकड़ा ही पकड़ा अंडर सेक्शन 66 से, उसकी फ्रेंड को भी पकड़ लिया. ठीक है, सेक्शन 66A was invoked and an arrest was made under section 66A. Now looking at this misuse of section 66A by the police, a law student approached the Supreme Court of India, whose name was Shreya Singhal. And she approached the Supreme Court of India in this case, Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, where she said that this section 66A of the IT Act is unreasonable and arbitrary in character, and it is imposing excessive restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. This section 66A of the IT Act is violative of Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution under freedom of speech and expression, and therefore it should be held as unconstitutional. Shreya Singhal also relied upon that, sir, Article 19(1)(a) is not an absolute right, I know that. And Article 19(1)(a) can be restricted on the basis of the grounds provided in Article 19(2). But जिस grounds के ऊपर 66A based है कि it will cause insult, it will cause inconvenience, it will cause annoyance to someone, ये सब grounds नहीं mentioned है 19(2) में जिसके basis के ऊपर freedom and speech and expression को curb किया जा सके. Are you getting what I am trying to say? See, the right of the state or the power of the state to impose restrictions on Article 19(1)(a) itself is limited by Article 19(2). State can impose restrictions on 19(1)(a) on the basis of the grounds provided in 19(2), but it can only do so on the basis of grounds provided in that article. Now, here right to freedom of speech and expression through internet, through new form of technology, through new age technology, was being restricted on the basis of the grounds which did not match the ones which are provided in 19(2). As a result, the court held that section 66A of the IT Act is unconstitutional and ultra vires of the freedom of speech and expression provided under Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. And it is in this case that the court held that right to express oneself freely through the internet is also a fundamental right implicit in Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. Is that clear to everyone? Right? So the meaning of Article 19(1)(a) has been expanded considerably by the court through its various judgments. That includes the right to express oneself through oral and written words. That includes the right to express oneself through various art forms. That includes the right to freedom of press. That includes the right to remain silent. That includes the right to hoist the national flag. That includes the right to express oneself through new forms of technology as well. Is that clear to everyone? So Article 19(1)(a) has been expanded by introducing various implicit meaning mentioned under Article 19(1)(a) by the various judgments of the courts in India. Is that clear? Right? Now see, what we also need to understand is that 19(1)(a) is not an absolute right, and it itself can be restricted on the basis of the grounds provided in Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution. So let's have a look at Article 19(2) once, and then I will show you that how 19(2) itself is not in its original form in the Indian Constitution as of present. There have been changes that have been made to Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution. So please open up Article 19(2) once and we will understand that. So Article 19(2) states that nothing in subclause A of clause 1 shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law. तो आर्टिकल 19(2) जो है वो एक तरीके से एक्सेप्शन है आर्टिकल 19(1) की, बिकॉज वो स्टेट को पावर दे रहा है कि कोई एग्जिस्टिंग लॉ या स्टेट कोई नई लॉ भी बना सकती है to restrict the application of 19(1)(a). But let's read further. It says that in so far as such law imposes reasonable restrictions. तो वो कहता है कि भाई आर्टिकल 19(1)(a) को स्टेट लॉ बना के रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर सकती है, बट दिस लॉ दैट इज मेड बाय द स्टेट for restricting the freedom of speech and expression itself should be imposing only reasonable restrictions, right? Reasonable restrictions on the exercise of the right conferred by the said subclause in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, friendly relations with foreign state, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offense. So on the basis of these grounds that have been mentioned that we just read, sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign state, decency or morality, contempt of the court, defamation or incitement to an offense, all these grounds that have been mentioned in 19(2) can be the grounds for restricting a person's freedom of speech and expression guaranteed under Article 19(1)(a). What that basically means is, let's try to understand that. जैसे इसमें लिखा है that on the grounds of friendly relations with foreign state. Now let's say India has developed very strong and friendly relations with United States of America. The President of America, Joe Biden arrives in India, and there is going to be a very important defense deal which is going to be signed between India and America, which will help us to gain access to technology to manufacture the F-16 of America. Let's say something like that is happening. Now, at that point of time, when Joe Biden is visiting, some people start writing articles in the newspaper which are very critical of Joe Biden, and not just critical, but are also alleging that Joe Biden is visiting India not because of friendly relations between India and US, but because of certain personal reasons. And then some people arrive on the street as well, and they say that, see, we have right to freedom of speech and expression. That includes our right to protest as well. भाई अगर हमें एक्सप्रेस करने का मौका है तो हमारे पास प्रोटेस्ट करने का भी मौका है, बिकॉज राइट टू फ्रीडम ऑफ असेंबली इज ऑल्सो देयर. तो हम इकट्ठा होकर प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं. दे गैदर एट द इंदिरा गांधी इंटरनेशनल एयरपोर्ट in Delhi, and they now are protesting or at the arrival of Joe Biden at the airport, and there is a huge protest that takes place, and they say that we will not allow Joe Biden to reach the hotel or to be able to meet the prime minister, etc., and so forth. Now these people may justify that, sir, we have right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a), but the state can then tell them that, see, your right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) is not absolute in nature, and it can be reasonably restricted by us. Here you are unreasonably exercising your right to freedom of speech and expression, which is affecting friendly relations with foreign state. As a result, we can impose limitations on your right to freedom of speech and expression, और इसीलिए हम ऑर्डर पास कर रहे हैं कि जो बाइडेन जो है वो एयरपोर्ट से अपने होटल तक जा सकते हैं, एंड देयर विल बी नो पर्सन हु विल बी अलाउड टू प्रोटेस्ट इन फ्रंट ऑफ हिज कॉन्वॉय, इवन दो यू मे से दैट इट इज अ वायलेशन ऑफ योर 19(1)(a), बट आपका 19(1)(a) वैसे भी एब्सोल्यूट नहीं है, और उसको फ्रेंडली रिलेशन विद फॉरेन स्टेट के बेसिस के ऊपर रिस्ट्रिक्ट किया जा सकता है. सिमिलरली, some person says that, see, I want to say something about other religion, and I want to make a hateful speech about some other religion, right? So a person belonging to X religion wants to make some hateful speech against a person belonging to religion Y, and he says that I have right to freedom of speech and expression, I can make hate speech also. क्या दिक्कत है? मैं आप लोगों के खिलाफ बोलूंगा, आपके रिलीजन के खिलाफ बोलूंगा, I will spread religious animosity, I will spread religious enmity, and you cannot stop me from doing that. But the state can, because there is a ground of public order also that has been mentioned. Public order may get disrupted because of such a speech that may be made by a person that may be affecting the religious sentiments of some other community. People may get inflamed, and then people may then try to react, and that may affect the public order and the peace and the tranquility in the society. So as a result, state on the basis of the grounds of public order can impose a restriction on hate speech that is made by a person that is trying to promote religious enmity between two groups or between two communities in India, right? So Article 19(2) में ये जो कुछ grounds mentioned हैं, इनके basis के ऊपर freedom of speech and expression को reasonably restrict किया जा सकता है. But what we need to understand is that the present form of Article 19(2) as we see is not what was always there in the Constitution. The original text of Article 19(2) was something else. So let's have a look at that original text of Article 19(2), and then I will tell you that what were the changes that were made by the subsequent constitutional amendment acts to change the text of Article 19(2) as well as of 19(3), 4, 5 and 6 of the Indian Constitution. Okay, so let's have a look at Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution as it existed originally in the Indian Constitution, and what were the circumstances that evolved that led to changes being introduced in Article 19(2). इसमें नहीं है. अरे यार. Now see, even another thing which I wanted to show you, if you look at the Constitution of India, the original copy of the Constitution of India, it has a lot of imagery that it carries from the ancient Indian culture, traditions, etc. Right? A lot of time when people talk about the idea of secularism, they believe that such imagery, such things should not be there in law, etc. and so on and so forth. But अगर आप Indian Constitution को ही देखेंगे, basic book जो है हमारी Constitution की, उसमें एक recognition दिया गया है इंडिया की ancient history, culture, traditions को. For example, अगर आप fundamental rights का chapter देखेंगे तो there is this image of Lord Ram that has been shown along with Sita and Lakshman, where Lord Ram is guiding people, guiding these two people on the path of dharma, right? So fundamental rights is very closely related to this. Similarly, आपको images of Buddha you will find images of Krishna and number of other things which will be there on the original copy of the Indian Constitution. Of course, all of this imagery and artwork had been done by Nandalal Bose and his students, and you know there was a lot of interesting things. अगर आप Google पे जाएंगे और अगर आप सर्च करेंगे तो आपको ओरिजिनल इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की कॉपी का स्कैन्ड वर्जन भी मिल जाएगा. So you will find some very interesting imagery, etc. and all of those things there. Anyway, so when we talk about Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution, originally जो Article 19(2) था वो ये था. As originally stated in the Indian Constitution. But first Constitutional Amendment Act से इसके अंदर significant changes introduce किए गए. Article 19(2) originally mentioned nothing in subclause A of clause 1 shall affect the operation of any existing law insofar as it relates to or prevent the state from making any law relating to libel, slander, defamation, contempt of court, or any matter which offends against decency or morality, or which undermines the security of the state or tends to overthrow the state. Now please try to figure out, after reading the present Article 19.2 and the original form of Article 19.2 of the Indian Constitution, as to what is the difference between these two provisions. Yes, please try to figure it out and tell me. एक बार देखिए खुद से, पहले देख लो एक बार. Before providing any response, just spend a bit of time to analyze what are the differences which are there between 19.2 and the present form of 19.2 and the original text of Article 19.2 of the Indian Constitution. एक बार देखिए जरा, spend a bit of time analyzing that. Yes, please tell me what are the differences one by one. Please raise your hands and then provide responses. Differences between the original Article 19.2 and the present form. Yes, sir. Okay, so the term reasonable restrictions has been introduced. Originally reasonable restrictions की बात नहीं थी. The term reasonable restrictions has been introduced in Article 19.1a, 19.2. और let me tell you, अगर आप देखोगे 19.3, 19.4, 19.5, 19.6 सब में reasonable restrictions word add किया गया, and this was added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act, the same Constitutional Amendment Act that we discussed earlier, where Article 31A and 31B had been introduced. First Constitutional Amendment Act से आपने reasonable restrictions word impose किया, Article 19 के अंदर ये introduce किया गया, ना केवल 19.2 में, but it was introduced in 19.3, 4, 5, 6 as well. Yes, what else? Yes, sir.
Some grounds has been changed which does not prevent the state to make law. Like
Specifically बताओ. Yes, sovereignty and integrity of India has been added as a ground. Yes, it has been added as a ground. This was not added by first Constitutional Amendment Act. This was added by 16th Constitutional Amendment Act, right? Similarly, we also added friendly relations with foreign state. Friendly relations with foreign state as well was included by the 16th Constitutional Amendment Act. Yes, what else? What are the other changes? हाँ जी, बताइए. और क्या change हुआ है? Yes, the term public order has been added. A ground has been added for restricting freedom of speech and expression, and that is public order, which was also added by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. ठीक है? We will discuss why these particular things were added, especially first Constitutional Amendment Act को discuss करेंगे. और बताइए, और क्या changes किए गए हैं? Like, yes, so some words have been deleted, some words have been removed, libel and slander have been removed. Defamation continues to be there. Actually ये सारी terms जो हैं बहुत closely related हैं, libel, slander, defamation etc. तो libel और slander को हटा दिया गया, but defamation continues to be there. Yes, what else? Yes, very good. Incitement to an offense has been added. Incitement to an offense हैज बीन एडेड, ये भी ऐड किया गया है। और बताइए, यस, क्लोजली देखो 19.2 को, ओरिजिनल और प्रेजेंट फॉर्म को। एक और बहुत मेजर डिफरेंस मिलेगा, सिक्योरिटी ऑफ दी, सो अंडरमाइन सिक्योरिटी ऑफ और टेंड्स टू ओवरथ्रो दी स्टेट, तो वहीं पे मेंशन्ड है, वैसा ही है, बस टेंड्स टू ओवरथ्रो की जगह सिक्योरिटी ऑफ द स्टेट मेंशन कर दिया गया है, तो ज्यादा कुछ डिफरेंस नहीं हुआ है उसके अंदर। एक और बहुत मेजर डिफरेंस है, यस, एनी ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स हु मे बी एबल टू टेल मी दैट? Yes ma'am. Yes, very good. If you see Article 19.2 presently and the original form, it says that insofar as it relates to, insofar as it relates to, ठीक है, ये ओरिजिनल प्रोविजन था। अभी हमने क्या किया है, वी हैव चेंज्ड इट विद द वर्ड इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ। ओके, so the word that has been added is in the interest of. In the interest of. So these are the changes that have been introduced. अब एक एक चीज को जरा समझेंगे हम कि ये चेंजेस क्यों इंट्रोड्यूस किए गए, बट उससे पहले मेरे आपसे एक दो क्वेश्चंस हैं। वन, टेल मी समथिंग, दो चीजें समझते हैं। अगर मैं वर्ड रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शंस इंपोज कर दूं, जो मैंने आर्टिकल 19.2 में लगाया, आफ्टर द इंट्रोडक्शन ऑफ द टर्म रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शंस दैट हैव बीन इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इन आर्टिकल 19.2, डज इट एक्सपैंड द फंडामेंटल राइट और डज इट limit the fundamental right, or in other words, does it expand the powers of the state or does it limit the powers of the state? What do you think? It limits the powers of the state, because पहले reasonable restriction जैसा कुछ नहीं था, but now 19.2 is saying that restrictions can be imposed and these restrictions should be reasonable in nature. Yes, so by the introduction of the term reasonable restrictions, what we are doing is we are reducing the powers of the state. Do you agree with me or not? Yes, we are basically saying that state can impose restriction on the basis of the grounds mentioned in article 19.2, but only reasonable restrictions. ठीक है, तो इससे power of the state is getting limited, because पहले वो कह रहा था, ऐसा कुछ नहीं कह रहा था, रीजनेबल जैसी कोई बात नहीं कह रहा था। अब 19.2 जो है वो कह रहा है दैट ओनली रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शंस कैन बी इंपोज्ड। व्हाट इज रीजनेबल, व्हाट इज अनरीजनेबल, ऑफ कोर्स इज अ सब्जेक्टिव टर्म दैट विल बी डिसाइडेड बाय द कोर्ट, बट एक चीज क्लियर है दैट नाउ 19.2 इज अलाउइंग द स्टेट टू इंपोज ओनली reasonable restrictions. Now second thing, tell me, when we are adding more grounds on the basis of which freedom of speech and expression can be restricted reasonably, are we adding to the power of the state or are we limiting the power of the state? We are adding to the power of the state. यार जब आप grounds बढ़ा दोगे तो you can of course, right, you are adding to the power of the state. When you add grounds on the basis of which, अगर मैं suppose कीजिए आज एक और ground add कर दूं, that in the interest of or in the or in relation to gender equality. So what am I doing? That you cannot exercise your freedom of speech and expression which is against gender equality, and if you do so reasonable restrictions can be imposed by the state on you. तो जब हम public order एक नया term introduce कर रहे हैं, sovereignty and integrity of India use कर रहे हैं, introduce कर रहे हैं, when we are introducing friendly relation with foreign state, what we are basically doing is we are expanding the powers of the state. But यहां पे हम क्या कर रहे हैं? We are reducing the powers of the state. So see, first Constitutional Amendment Act, 16th Constitutional Amendment Act, on one hand they increase the power of the state to impose restrictions on freedom of speech and expression by adding more grounds. But on the other hand, they also limited the powers of the state by introducing this term reasonable restrictions. Are you getting what I am trying to say? So जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट की जा रही है वो डिफरेंट चीजों को दिमाग में रख के की जा रही है. ऐसा नहीं कि पावर ऑफ द स्टेट को exorbitantly increase कर दिया जाए at the expense of the right of the citizen. Power of the state should also be restricted. जब आप grounds बढ़ा रहे हो, when you are increasing the grounds on the basis of which freedom of speech and expression can be restricted, then you need to limit the power of the state also. That you are doing by introducing the term reasonable restrictions. Similarly, one more thing, and which is when we are saying अगर मैंने in relation to को in the interest of से change कर दिया है, right? I have changed the term in the interest of, in the relation to in the interest of. Now tell me, which one expands the powers of the state more, in the interest of or in the relation to? In relation to. See, try to understand. In relation to is a very broad thing. This is related to this or not is a very broad, it's a very subjective thing. In the interest of is a very specific thing. आप बात समझिए, मैं कह रहा हूं that I will do this because I am in relation to that person. Now relation is a very broad idea, but I say that I will do this for you because it is in your interest. तो इन योर इंटरेस्ट आपकी पावर को लिमिट कर रहा है एज अ स्टेट. बात समझने की कोशिश करो. व्हाट वी हैव डन इज वी हैव चेंज द टर्म इन द ओरिजिनल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इन रिलेशन टू विद इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ. हमने इससे रिप्लेस किया. द टर्म इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ इज अ मोर स्पेसिफिक टर्म एज कंपेयर टू इन रिलेशन टू. अगर मैं ये बोलूं कि इन रिलेशन टू आप ये कर सकते हो तो आपको बहुत ज्यादा पावर मिलती है, बट अगर मैं ये बोलूं आप केवल इसके इंटरेस्ट में ये कर सकते हो तो यू आर रिस्ट्रिक्टिंग द पावर्स ऑफ द स्टेट. सो व्हाट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड इज थ्री थिंग्स हियर. वन, रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शंस बीइंग एडेड इज रिड्यूसिंग द पावर ऑफ द स्टेट. New grounds being added such as public order is increasing the power of the state. Yes, and the introduction of the term in the interest of is again reducing the power of the state. और मैं बार बार यही समझा रहा हूं कि आर्टिकल 19 जो है उसका मेजर जो रिलेशनशिप है वो स्टेट और सिटीजन की रिलेशनशिप बनाने में है. सी, फंडामेंटल राइट्स एंड कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इटसेल्फ. The objective of constitution, if you would remember the first class, was to define what will be the relationship between the state and the citizens. We wrote the constitution in the first place so that no one or anyone cannot just come into power and take away the basic rights of the citizens. We were trying to define the relationship between the citizens and the state with the help of a written constitution. Right? That is what Article 19 is also doing. Article 19 में जो ये चीज दिमाग में रखने की जरूरत है, addition of grounds is increasing the powers of the state to impose restrictions, but addition of reasonable restrictions is limiting the powers of the state, and in addition of the word in the interest of in comparison to the word relates to is again decreasing the powers of the state or limiting the powers of the state. यहां तक सबको क्लियर है? Now, what happened because of which we were forced to introduce the first constitutional amendment act? See, background था शंकरी प्रसाद केस में भी फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट आने का कि भाई लैंड रिफॉर्म्स इंट्रोड्यूस करने थे, बट अक्रॉस द कंट्री हाई कोर्ट्स ने जजमेंट गवर्नमेंट के खिलाफ दी थी कि दीज लैंड रिफॉर्म्स आर अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल एंड आर वायलेटिव ऑफ राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी. तो हमने फिर क्या किया, राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी को ही एक्सेप्शन हटाया नहीं सर, हमने राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी को रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर दिया. वी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड द राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी बाय इंट्रोड्यूसिंग एक्सेप्शन इन फॉर्म ऑफ 31A एंड 31B. सिमिलरली व्हाट हैपेंड इन द फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट, एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ विच वी हैड टू इंट्रोड्यूस दीज चेंजेस इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. सो देयर वाज अ जर्नलिस्ट कॉल्ड एज रमेश थापड़. सो रमेश थापड़ was a left-wing communist journalist who used to have a lot of publications which were very popular in the state of Kerala. Kerala has always had that communist influence on it, and he was very popular. He was writing a number of magazines and journals in the state of Kerala that included the Blitz, the Crossroad, etc., and all of those things. So different apni magazines or journals he used to publish, and he was very critical of the government of India as well, and he was critical of Pandit Nehru's policy. He was very critical of whatever the functioning of the government was, and at times he was also writing things which some people found very objectionable, that may affect public order, that may cause rioting, etc. कुछ लोगों के according उनकी writing इतनी ज़्यादा inflammatory थी that it may disturb public order as well. It may cause some kind of disturbance in public order where there may be some riots or some cases of violence that may break out. जिस तरीके की writing वो अपने journals और magazines में कर रहे थे. Now he wanted to expand his magazine and journals to Madras as well, and he wanted to circulate it in the state of Madras also. But the government of India passed an order, state of Madras passed an order that the magazines and the journals published by so and so person and whatever would not be allowed to be circulated in the state of Madras. Now Ramesh Thapar went to the Supreme Court of India against this order of Madras government. That is, this order is imposing restrictions on my freedom of speech and expression. This order is law under Article 13 of the Indian Constitution, और Article 13 ये कहता है that no law can be made against a fundamental right. And this order is against my fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a), which also includes right to freedom of press. And my right to freedom of press, my right to freedom of speech and expression, which is my fundamental right as a citizen, is getting violated because of this order made by Madras government. So this is what he went and stated in the court. And government ने क्या justification दिया? Government ने ये बोला that this particular publication journal has tendency to affect the public order, and therefore we are imposing a restriction on the circulation of this magazine in the state of Madras. इसकी वजह से public order affect हो सकता है. But remember, ये सब हो रहा है first constitutional amendment act से पहले, when public order was not even mentioned in Article 19(2), on the basis of which freedom of speech and expression can be curbed. So Ramesh Thapar said ki sir, these people have imposed a restriction on my freedom of speech and expression on the grounds of public order. It is not even mentioned in the constitution right now. How can they impose a restriction on my freedom of speech and expression on the grounds of public order? It is unconstitutional. Restrictions can be imposed only on the basis of the grounds mentioned in Article 19(2), and public order is not mentioned there. So the court agreed with him, and the court gave judgment in his favor. And the court said that the order which has been made by Madras government is unconstitutional in nature. Because the court said the ground on which the state has imposed restriction is public order. But public order is not mentioned there. अब state ने बोला कि sir नहीं, पर undermining the security or tends to overthrow the state तो mentioned है. So court said that see, you can't equate these two terms. Public order तो छोटी सी चीज है भाई. There is a riot, there is a fist fight that breaks out between 10 people on the road. पांच लोगों के बीच में मुक्का लात घूसे मारने लग गए लोग एक दूसरे को खड़े होकर सड़क के ऊपर. इससे पब्लिक ऑर्डर अफेक्ट हो रहा है, ठीक है, बट क्या इससे सिक्योरिटी ऑफ द स्टेट अफेक्ट हो जा रही है? नो, right? It does not mean that the Indian state has come into a threat because 10 people are fighting on the road. See, let's say मैं अपनी गाड़ी बीच सड़क में खड़ी करके ट्रैफिक रोक दूं, that may affect public order, but that cannot affect the entire country. You getting what I am trying to say? It will not put Indian state into threat कि मेरे सड़क में गाड़ी उल्टा खड़े करने से अचानक से पूरी इंडियन स्टेट खतरे में आ गई, right? So the court said that see, security of the state has been mentioned, but public order के ग्राउंड पे आपने लगाया है रिस्ट्रिक्शन तो, और पब्लिक ऑर्डर और सिक्योरिटी ऑफ द स्टेट को आप इक्वेट नहीं कर सकते. सो द कोर्ट सेज दैट सी, दिस रिस्ट्रिक्शन दैट हैज बीन इम्पोज्ड बाय यू on this person's freedom of speech and expression is not constitutional because it is not sanctioned by Article 19(2), and therefore we are holding that your order is unconstitutional. अब इसका क्या मतलब है? इस कोर्ट की जजमेंट के बहुत रिपरकशंस हुए अक्रॉस द कंट्री. Various judgments of the high courts across the country also came in the favor of citizens wherever there were laws that were made by the state governments to stop any kind of hate speech or seditious speech being made by people. अब सपोज कीजिए बिहार के अंदर या कहीं पे भी, और ऐसे केसेस आए, बिहार में केसेस आए, उत्तर प्रदेश में केसेस आए, वेयर देयर वर पीपल नाउ दोज हु वर ट्राइंग टू इंसाइट रायट्स. अब मैं अपनी फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन को यूज करके, यूजिंग माय फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन, I start inciting violence. I start coaxing people that take up arms. Let's kill the people from that particular community. Let's go and burn down their houses. Let's do this. Let's do that. I am trying to affect public order, but public order is not a ground on the basis of which my freedom of speech and expression can be curbed, which basically means that now I can make any kind of hate speech. कोर्ट ने एक तरीके से लेजिटिमाइज कर दिया कि देखो हमारी गलती नहीं है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में पब्लिक ऑर्डर इज नॉट मेंशन्ड एज अ ग्राउंड. कोर्ट इज सेइंग दैट सी सिंस पब्लिक ऑर्डर इज नॉट मेंशन्ड एज अ ग्राउंड, पब्लिक ऑर्डर कैन बी अफेक्टेड बाय स्पीच ऑफ अ पर्सन एंड law cannot be made by the state to restrict the speech of the person that may be affecting public order. Yes, if it is affecting security of the state, then reasonable restriction can be imposed. So in response to this, Parliament of India decided that see, this is going to create havoc in the country. India is a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society. Every day people will go around on the street and say something or the other about some other community. They will try to spread hatred. They will try to cause riots, and we will not be able to stop them because public order is not mentioned as a ground. Right? Similarly, incitement to an offense is not mentioned as a ground. So if a person is, let's say, some terrorist is trying to indoctrinate some other person, एक किसी टेररिस्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने किसी एक यंग लड़के को पकड़ लिया 16 साल के, and they are trying to indoctrinate him that you should do this for your religion, you should go and kill these people are bad, etc. I am trying to incite an offense from him. I am trying to incite violence by using my freedom of speech and expression, but no restriction can be put on my freedom of speech and expression because incitement to an offense is not mentioned in Article 19(2). As a result, Parliament of India decided that see, we have made a mistake in the constitution. We need to add some more grounds in 19(2) on the basis of which freedom of speech and expression can be curbed. But they also realize that see, because we will be adding grounds, we will be giving more powers to the state. Now these powers to the state should not be misused. As a result, let's introduce some counterbalancing words also, and that's why they introduced reasonable restrictions and in the interest of the state to counterbalance the increased power of the state by providing new grounds on the basis of which freedom of speech and expression can be curbed. The state also introduced, the parliament also introduced certain words in the constitution in Article 19(2) by which now the powers of the state will also be restricted. So it was a counterbalancing act that was played by the Parliament of India. That is, on one hand, it is trying to increase the powers of the state on the basis of increasing the grounds. But on the other hand, it is trying to restrict the powers of the state as well by introducing these terms such as reasonable restrictions as well as in the interest of. Who will decide whether a restriction is reasonable or not? Court. Is that clear to you? So this is the story of introduction of changes in the Constitution of India, especially Article 19(2). Of course, changes were introduced in 19(3), 4, 5, 6 as well. वहां पे भी हमने reasonable restrictions add कर दिया word कि अब केवल restrictions लग सकती हैं अगर freedoms के ऊपर. They can be imposed on the in a reasonable manner only. Right? So this is what we need to understand behind the evolution of Article 19 of the Indian Constitution by the first Constitutional Amendment Act. Is this clear to everyone? Yes. So just take down a few notes in case something has not become clear. It will become much more crystal clear in your mind after writing down this. So please write down. So I hope that you people have taken down importance of Article 19(1)(a), freedom of speech and expression. I don't need to dictate that, right? And you have also written down what are the implicit meaning along with some cases under Article 19(1)(a) and freedom of speech and expression. Now please give the heading, and ये भी लिख लिया differences between the original and the present form of Article 19(2). So please write down the reasons for amending Article 19. Reasons for amending Article 19 by the first Constitutional Amendment Act, by the first and the 16th Constitutional Amendment Act. By the first and the 16th Constitutional Amendment Act. So an online student is asking, can we say that addition of the term public order expanded the powers of the state? Of course it did, right? So please write down. In the case of Ramesh Thapad versus State of Madras, Ramesh Thapad in the case of Ramesh Thapad versus State of Madras, 1950. This was one of the first few cases that was decided by the Supreme Court of India after its constitution. So please write down, in the case of Ramesh Thapad versus State of Madras, the Supreme Court held that public order considerations, the Supreme Court held that public order considerations cannot be the ground for imposing restrictions on freedom of speech and expression, for imposing restrictions on freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a). Under Article 19(1)(a). Full stop. Next sentence. Ramesh Thapad wanted to expand the circulation of his publications, to the state of Madras, but an order was made by Madras government, that prevented him from doing so on the grounds of public order. Full stop. The petitioner, that is Ramesh Thapad, the petitioner made arguments on the basis of Article 19, and pleaded that his fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression, FOSSE, and pleaded that his fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression has been unreasonably restricted has been unreasonably restricted without any constitutional basis, without any constitutional basis, as public order, as public order is not mentioned as a ground, as public order is not mentioned as a ground to restrict a citizen's, to restrict a citizen's freedom of speech and expression, to restrict a citizen's freedom of speech and expression. Full stop. The Supreme Court ruled in his favor. The Supreme Court ruled in his favor and stated that, and stated that, and stated that small instances that affect public order, small events or instances that affect public order cannot be equated with the term security of the state, cannot be equated with the term security of the state. Full stop. In response, the Parliament of India, introduced the first Constitutional Amendment Act. In response, the Parliament of India introduced the first Constitutional Amendment Act and added grounds of public order, and incitement to an offense, to Article 19.2, full stop. The idea was to prevent the courts from striking down such laws, that impose restrictions on freedom of speech and expression, where such right may be misused, to incite murder, promoting enmity between different groups, etc. Promoting enmity between different groups, etc. ठीक है, तो जो एक बार लिखा है एक बार पढ़ लीजिएगा. Just read it once. Just giving you a minute. Please read it once, whatever you have written till here. That what really happened in Ramesh Thapar case, and then in order to counter that, because across the country courts had now started to give judgments on the basis of the Supreme Court judgment. So in order to counter that, Parliament of India introduced the first Constitutional Amendment Act, where they added the word public order and incitement to an offense so that state can get more powers to impose restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression, where a citizen may justify his freedom of speech and expression and may use it or misuse it for causing riots, for causing violence, for inciting murder, etc., and so on and so forth. हाँ जी. आपको क्या लगता है? क्या? किसको? यही रमेश थापड़ का. हाँ, क्योंकि अब तो पब्लिक ऑर्डर आ गया ना सर ग्राउंड. हाँ सर, पब्लिक ऑर्डर इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ और रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शन तो स्टेट की पावर को लिमिट कर रहा है सर. पब्लिक ऑर्डर ग्राउंड इंट्रोड्यूस हो गया तो अब इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ पब्लिक ऑर्डर यू कैन रिस्ट्रिक्ट द पर्सन फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन, एंड रमेश थापड़ स्पीच कैन बी जस्टिफाइड टू बी अफेक्टिंग पब्लिक ऑर्डर. तभी तो फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट लेकर आए टू ओवर रूल द जजमेंट ऑफ द कोर्ट इन रमेश थापड़ केस. ठीक है, क्या सवाल क्या है, मैं समझा नहीं. तो सर यही तो अभी इतनी देर से हम बात कर रहे हैं सर. सर तो वही तो हम बात कर रहे हैं इतनी देर से. ठीक है, यस, प्लीज राइट डाउन फर्दर. इन ऑर्डर टू बैलेंस द पावर्स ऑफ द स्टेट, in order to balance the powers of the state with the rights of an individual, in order to balance the powers of the state with the rights of an individual, the parliament also added two terms. The parliament also added two terms that limited the powers of the state. The parliament also added two terms. The parliament also added two terms that limited the powers of the state. Which are these two terms? First, reasonable restrictions, and second, in the interest of. In the interest of. लिबेल एंड स्लैंडर का जो डिलीशन है दैट हैज बीन डन बिकॉज उसके ऊपर देखिए डिफेमेशन इज एनफ अ टर्म जिसमें लिबेल और स्लैंडर भी कवर हो जाता है. ऑफ कोर्स वी विल हैव टू गो थ्रू द मीनिंग ऑफ ईच ऑफ दीज टर्म्स टू अंडरस्टैंड द सटल nuances of what is the difference between them, but it was decided कि this is also unnecessarily creating confusion. Let's just restrict it to defamation only. ठीक है, बिकॉज लिबेल और स्लैंडर जो है वो बहुत ब्रॉड टर्म्स हैं और उसको भी मिसयूज किया जा सकता है. सो दैट इज वाई वी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड इट टू ओनली डिफेमेशन. या ऑफ कोर्स बिकॉज लिबेल एंड स्लैंडर कैन बी मिसयूज बाय द स्टेट, तो डिफेमेशन केवल रखा गया लिबेल और स्लैंडर की जगह. ठीक है, फर्दर राइट डाउन वेदर अ पर्टिकुलर रिस्ट्रिक्शन इज रीजनेबल और नॉट. Whether a particular restriction is reasonable or not is to be decided by the courts. Is to be decided by the courts. तो इससे आप एक चीज और देखिए कि पार्लियामेंट बाय इंट्रोडक्शन ऑफ द टर्म रीजनेबल रिस्ट्रिक्शंस कोर्ट की पावर को एक्सपैंड कर देता है, राइट? बिकॉज अब कोर्ट के पास पावर है टू डिसाइड वेदर अ रिस्ट्रिक्शन इज रीजनेबल और नॉट, बिकॉज रीजनेबल अपने अंदर बड़ा एक subjective term है. What may be reasonable to you may be unreasonable to me, right? So therefore reasonability जो है वो court decide करेगी. And please write down next sentence. On the other hand replacement of the term relates to रिलेट्स टू को डबल कोट्स इन्वर्टेड कॉमास में लिख लीजिएगा. ऑन द अदर हैंड रिप्लेसमेंट ऑफ द टर्म रिलेट्स टू विद द टर्म इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द स्टेट. इंटरेस्ट ऑफ द स्टेट को भी डबल इन्वर्टेड कॉमास में लिख लीजिएगा. On the other hand, replacement of the term relates to with the term interest of the state severely limits the powers of the state, severely limits the power of the state. State की बात हो रही है, states मत लिखिएगा, state. Severely limits the powers of the state as the latter term, that is in the interest of, as the latter term is narrower in meaning, as the latter term is narrower in its meaning, as the latter term is narrower in its meaning. Is this clear to everyone? तो अब जो presently grounds हैं वो हैं the sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relation with foreign state. तो इन grounds को भी दो categorization में classify किया जा सकता है. Please write down. Presently the grounds for imposing reasonable restrictions. Presently the grounds for imposing reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech and expression, can be categorized as follows. तो पहला लिख लीजिए उसमें grounds of national interest. तो national interest के grounds में तीन grounds आएंगे: sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state and friendly relation with foreign state. तो उसके नीचे वो लिख लीजिए तीनों. grounds of national interest में आप इन तीन grounds को categorize कर सकते हैं जो nation के interest में है: sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state and friendly relation with foreign state. ठीक है? ठीक है. और फिर सेकंड जो है दैट इज ग्राउंड्स ऑफ सोसाइटल इंटरेस्ट. तो उसमें आपका ये पब्लिक ऑर्डर, इंसाइटमेंट टू एन ऑफेंस, कंटेम्प्ट ऑफ कोर्ट, डिसेंसी एंड मोरालिटी, ये सब जो चीजें हैं ये उसमें आ जाएंगी. तो उसको उसके नीचे लिख लीजिएगा सो दैट यू रिमेंबर दैट देयर आर टू वेज इन विच these grounds can be categorized. This is what article 19 of the constitution, 19(2) of the constitution is all about. Now we'll go into a break now. After the break I will discuss the meaning of each of these terms. Okay, जो ये grounds mentioned है 19(2) में, इन सबको हम समझेंगे और इनसे रिलेटेड कुछ इश्यूज भी डिस्कस करेंगे. जैसे डिफेमेशन का क्या मतलब होता है और इंडिया में कौन सी ऐसी लॉ एग्जिस्ट करती है जो कि फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन को रिस्ट्रिक्ट करती है ऑन द ग्राउंड्स ऑफ डिफेमेशन. सो आफ्टर द ब्रेक वी विल अंडरस्टैंड, फॉर एग्जांपल, व्हाट डू वी अंडरस्टैंड बाय डिफेमेशन, एंड इन इंडिया व्हाट आर द लॉज दैट एग्जिस्ट दैट रिस्ट्रिक्ट द फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द ग्राउंड ऑफ डिफेमेशन. इज दैट क्लियर? Right? Then similarly we will understand public decency and morality, contempt of court, etc., and all of those things as well. And related to these, what are some of the issues? For example, defamation. In India we have a criminal defamation law as well. Section 499 of the IPC says that defamation can be a criminal offense also, and a criminal charge can be imposed on a person who is making some defamatory comments against any person. So we will understand the legality of that and what has been court's viewpoint on that after the break. Okay, so I'll see you after the break.
Hanji.
ठीक है आगे बोलो। हाँ मुझे पता है, मतलब तुम, हाँ आगे आगे। So the so the question asked is that so many number of times the Parliament of India has enacted laws in order to overrule the judgment of the court. So then how can we say that judiciary has powers to review the laws made by the Parliament? See, that power of the judiciary to review the laws made by the Parliament remains intact. But in no way it takes away the powers of the Parliament to amend the Constitution as well. Constitution at the end of the day is an organic document, and Parliament also has powers to amend the Constitution. Now, of course, this brings the conflict of two organs of the state in, or this brings the two organs of the state into conflict with each other, or powers of two organs of the state in conflict with each other, right? And that is the, you can say, the irony, or that is the reality of how the law functions, right? But that does not mean that the judiciary does not have powers to review the laws, or the Parliament does not have powers to amend the Constitution accordingly as it may want to. हाँ, ये जरूर बात है जो मैं पर्सनली मानता हूं कि फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट एक्ट ने एक ऐसा प्रेसिडेंस सेट किया इंडिया में that it led to several other amendments of the Indian Constitution. See, actually, if you look at it, the first Constitutional Amendment Act introduced by the Constituent Assembly of India itself to amend the Constitution which they had written set a very wrong precedent in India. That whenever the court says something, we can always overrule that by passing an amendment to the Indian Constitution. And which is, of course, a very problematic thing, and that is why too many changes also in the Constitution is not good. We have amended our Constitution more than 105 times in last 70 years, 72 years, and look at America's Constitution. So this is one problem which is there, but there is not much which can be done about it. Both the judiciary and the legislature need to show restraint. There is nothing which can be done as such. कुछ कर नहीं सकते इसके बारे में, यही reality है. एक ही चीज हो सकती है कि पार्लियामेंट भी अपना रिस्ट्रेन दिखाए और जुडिशरी भी रिस्ट्रेन दिखाए, बिकॉज ऐसा नहीं है कि केवल पार्लियामेंट ने ऐसा किया तो पार्लियामेंट ने जुडिशरी की पावर्स छीन ली. जुडिशरी ने भी बहुत सारे टाइम्स पार्लियामेंट और एग्जीक्यूटिव के डोमेन में इंटरफियर किया है. व्हेन द जुडिशरी टेल्स दैट पीपल वेदर दे शुड बी वेयरिंग हेलमेट्स ऑन द सेकंड राइडर ऑन द बाइक शुड बी वेयरिंग हेलमेट और नॉट. अब this is an excessive interference being made by the judiciary into the matters of the legislature or the executive. Similarly, अगर कोर्ट जजमेंट पास कर रही है कि जी 8 से 10 के बीच में ही पटाखे बजेंगे दिवाली पे, अब उनके लिए तो कहना आसान है, एक्चुअल मुसीबत तो गवर्नमेंट की आई है ना, बिकॉज दे विल हैव टू एनफोर्स दैट ऑर्डर. और वो कैसे एनफोर्स करेंगे? हर चौराहे नुक्कड़ कोने के ऊपर क्या पुलिस वाले खड़े होंगे? और कितने पुलिस वाले लेकर आओगे आप जो घड़ी लेके खड़े होंगे, स्टॉप वॉच चालू कर देंगे 8 बजे और बोलेंगे चलिए बजाइए 10 बजे तक पटाखे, अब 10 बज गए अब बंद कर दो, राइट? सो बोथ द आर्ग्यूमेंट्स आर देयर एंड दैट इज द रियलिटी ऑफ द सिचुएशन. ठीक है, कुछ कर नहीं सकते इस बारे में सर, बट दिस इज द टसल बिटवीन द जुडिशरी एंड द एग्जीक्यूटिव एंड द पार्लियामेंट दैट वी नीड टू बी अवेयर ऑफ. नहीं यार, राइट और रॉन्ग कुछ नहीं होता सर. अब फिलोसॉफिकल डिबेट से हम थोड़ा सा आगे, राइट और रॉन्ग क्या होता है सर? राइट और रॉन्ग तो कुछ नहीं है ना. देयर इज नथिंग राइट और रॉन्ग, इट इज ऑल सब्जेक्टिव. सर अगेन my point is that this is a matter which is supposed to be taken up as per the constitution. क्या होना चाहिए नहीं होना चाहिए बड़ा मुश्किल है सर बताना. क्या जुडिशरी को फिर ये करना चाहिए, क्या लेजिस्लेचर को करना चाहिए? हम नहीं कर सकते. हम डिस्पैशनेटली सब्जेक्ट को देखते हैं और हम बोलते हैं कि जी ये हो रहा है. ठीक है, वैल्यू जजमेंट जो है आप अपनी अगर साइड रखेंगे तो बेटर रहेगा इस एग्जाम में हर तरीके से. और जनरली भी लॉ के अंदर वैल्यू जजमेंट्स अगर आप लाना शुरू कर देंगे, नॉर्मेटिव जजमेंट जिसको बोलते हैं, If you start getting that into the subject of law, then it will become very problematic, because फिर आप समझ नहीं पाएंगे. Law in itself can be problematic at times. फिर so that is how things work. ठीक है. Anyway, so हाँ sir. सर हिजाब बैन पे ना आर्टिकल 25 में डिस्कस करेंगे. सर हिजाब बैन और ये सब जो चीजें हैं आर्टिकल 25 में डिस्कस करेंगे. अभी तक कोई इशू है तो बताइए. सर मेरे को इस पे बताइए ना, यहां पे. हाँ सर बताइए. सर आने दो कोर्ट की जजमेंट. देखो यार, मैं यहाँ पे सभा नहीं खोल के बैठा हूँ जहां पे हम डिस्कशन करेंगे. क्लास के सिलेबस से रिस्ट्रिक्ट करते हैं अपने को, डिस्कशन करते हैं. जब हिजाब की बात आएगी, आर्टिकल 25 की बात आएगी, तब हम बात करेंगे. लेट्स रिस्ट्रिक्ट, हमें ना एग्जाम क्लियर करना है, हमें सिलेबस कवर करना है. लेट्स रिस्ट्रिक्ट आवरसेल्व्स टू व्हाट इज सपोज्ड टू बी कवर्ड इन द क्लास. ठीक है, उस पर रिस्ट्रिक्ट करते हैं, सिलेबस के ऊपर डिस्कशन करते हैं, इधर उधर की आलतू फालतू की बातें नहीं करते. सर सुप्रीम कोर्ट में गया है मैटर अभी, आपको पता है. सुप्रीम कोर्ट में अपील किया गया है इसके खिलाफ, और मैं आर्टिकल 25 में डिस्कस करूंगा एसेंशियल रिलीजियस प्रैक्टिस ऑफ द जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ले डाउन किया हुआ है शिरूर मठ केस में. विल डिस्कस अबाउट इट. बट इधर उधर की बातों से डिस्ट्रैक्ट नहीं करें हम तो अच्छा रहेगा. देखिए आप लोग ना, मैं आई वाज डिस्कसिंग दिस विद वन ऑफ द फैकल्टीज यस्टरडे. द बिगेस्ट प्रॉब्लम इज दैट, मैं समझता हूं कि आप लोगों की क्यूरियोसिटी है, बट एक बात ध्यान रखिए, क्यूरियोसिटी बहुत अच्छी चीज है और मैं आपको रिस्ट्रिक्ट नहीं कर रहा हूं. आप जाके जितना इस पे रिसर्च करना चाहते हैं कीजिए, किसी ने नहीं रोका है आपको. बट हमारी क्लासेस लिमिटेड है, मेरे पास लिमिटेड टाइम है और बहुत सारा सिलेबस कवर करना है ना, बहुत सारे टॉपिक्स कवर करने हैं. वी डोंट हैव टाइम कि हम रैंडम डिस्कशंस के अंदर कहीं से भी कोई भी सुप्रीम कोर्ट का कुछ इशू आ गया, कुछ आ गया, हम फिर अभी कोई बोलेगा सर कश्मीर फाइल्स के ऊपर क्या चल रहा है, फिर कोई कुछ, आप समझ रहे हैं, किसी भी रैंडम चीजों पे, सर विराट कोहली को किसी ने कुछ बोल दिया, कोई भी इशू हम नहीं रैंडमली लेकर आए क्लास के अंदर तो बेटर रहेगा. बिकॉज लेट्स ट्राई टू रिस्ट्रिक्ट आवर फोकस ऑफ डिस्कशन. सेकेंड थिंग इज, आपके लिए भी फ्रूटफुल रहेगा अगर आप इस एग्जाम को क्वालिफाई करना चाहते हैं तो. देखिए मैं बहुत सिंपल साफ शब्दों में बोल रहा हूं, एग्जाम क्वालिफाई करना है तो 8 लाख लोग अपीयर करते हैं, 700 लोग सेलेक्ट होते हैं. इस एग्जाम को क्लियर करने के लिए लेजर शार्प फोकस चाहिए. लेजर शार्प फोकस, विच बेसिकली मींस जितना एग्जाम की रिक्वायरमेंट है उतना पढ़ो, उससे ज्यादा फालतू का लेफ्ट राइट सेंटर अपना दिमाग मारने की कोशिश मत करो. उसका रीजन है क्योंकि ये सब्जेक्ट्स ऐसे हैं ना दैट दे विल ड्रॉ यू इनटू देम. सो आई कंप्लीटली अंडरस्टैंड योर क्यूरियोसिटी, आई अंडरस्टैंड योर क्यूरियोसिटी, देयर इज नथिंग रॉन्ग इन दैट, बट ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड कि आप लोगों के पास भी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड टाइम है. मेरी क्लासेस छोड़ दो, आप लोगों के पास भी रिस्ट्रिक्टेड टाइम है टू अननेसेसरली नॉट इंटरफियर इनटू मैटर्स व्हिच आर नॉट एसोसिएटेड विद दिस, राइट. दूसरी बात ये है कि सर वो 19(1)(a) में चले गए हैं. देखो जो पिटिशनर जाएगा कोर्ट वो तो सर 50 कंटेंशन लेके जाएगा कोर्ट, समझ रहे हो. वो 21 में भी जाएगा, 25 में भी जाएगा, 19 में भी जाएगा, बहुत सारे 26 में भी जाएगा, वो बहुत सारी कंटेंशन बना के जाएगा, बिकॉज उसको तो कोर्ट में आर्ग्यू करना है ना. तो वो एक अलग मैटर है. बट एक एक चीज को अगर हम पकड़ के उसकी डेप्थ में जाना शुरू करेंगे तो मैं आपको ये बता रहा हूं 19(1)(a) जैसा एक जो प्रोविजन है उसके ऊपर मैं, I'll tell you very honestly, I myself keep reading on a daily basis, at least a couple of hours. Then also I can't claim that I have knowledge of even one Indian constitution provision completely, because it is not possible. The subject is so vast, it is so wide, it is so in depth. ठीक है, हर चीज का इतना ज्यादा एक डेप्थ है कि हम कहीं हमें एक अपने को रिस्ट्रिक्ट करना पड़ेगा. और ये आप लोग जितना जल्दी समझ लें इस एग्जाम की प्रिपरेशन में उतना बेटर है आपके लिए. अदरवाइज अब बहुत सिंपल सी बात है, जैसे एल्फ्रेड वेगनर की कॉन्टिनेंटल ड्रिफ्ट थ्योरी है. अब कोई मुझे आके बोले कि सर वो कॉन्टिनेंटल ड्रिफ्ट थ्योरी में आपने तो इतना एक्सप्लेन कर दिया, अब इसके अंदर इनडेप्थ जाने के लिए लोग 5-5 साल पीएचडी कर रहे हैं, राइट. आर्टिकल 19(1)(a) पे लोगों ने 5-5 साल पीएचडी की हुई है 19(1)(a) के एक एस्पेक्ट पे, that whether there is right to freedom of speech and expression that exists with the use of internet or not. इसी के ऊपर 5 साल एक आदमी ने रिसर्च किया है, अब आप उससे कंपेयर थोड़ी ना करेंगे. सो प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड दिस इज फॉर योर ओन बेनिफिट, कि आप जो ये लेफ्ट राइट सेंटर नॉइज चलती रहती है ना हमारी सोसाइटी में, उसको थोड़ा सा कीप इट एट बे. आई अंडरस्टैंड दैट यू शुड बी अवेयर, आई अंडरस्टैंड दैट यू शुड बी knowing things, but at the same time try to restrict your focus to the exam. वहां पे आ जाइए आप, उसके ऊपर ज्यादा फोकस कीजिए, वो ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. आपका क्वेश्चन एकदम वैलिड है सर. हम आर्टिकल 25 पे जब डिस्कशन करेंगे, आई विल हैव अ डिटेल्ड डिस्कशन इन द क्लास ऑन द इशू रिलेटेड टू Sabrimala. We will have discussion on the hijab issue, etc., and all of those things also. But let us not unnecessarily digress into areas which are of no concern to us. ठीक है, दैट इज व्हाट आई वुड रेकमेंड टू यू. रेस्ट इज योर चॉइस, वो आपका वो है. प्लस एज फार एज दीज क्लासेस आर कंसर्न, सी आई एम द वन हु डिसाइड्स what and how much will be taught, because I am the one who's experienced here, not you, right? So, and if you have trusted us, just leave it to us, that we will be trying to ensure that only that what is required for the examination will be discussed in the classes. Okay, now let's discuss about the ground of defamation first. Defamation is one of the grounds that has been mentioned in Article 19(2), on the basis of which a person's freedom of speech and expression can be reasonably restricted by the state. Now, what do we mean by defamation in the first place? Anyone who can give definition in your own words, what is the meaning of the term defamation? Please raise your hands and then answer. Yes, sir. Putting the image down of whom? Of an individual or an institution. Okay, anyone else who may want to add? Yes? Yes? To insult. Insult is a very broad term, sir. Okay, fair enough. Anyone else? Yes, you wanted to add something? Yes, so defamation, that also is very important. When a person tries to bring down reputation of someone by stating certain fact, by making some statement, by making some kind of oral statement, written statement, by some visible representation, signs, etc., when someone tries to bring someone else into disrepute, then that is what is called as defamation. Merely insult is not defamation. You know, if a teacher insults a student, says that you are a lazy bum, that is not defamation, right? Someone cannot go to the court and say कि मेरे को टीचर ने ऐसा बोल दिया. A father tells a child कि तू तो गधा है, right? That is not defamation, that's an insult. Okay, so defamation is when a person makes a public statement. ये भी बड़ा important है. मैं अपने दिमाग में बहुत सारी चीजें सोचता हूँ. In my bedroom, I may be saying number of things about Ambani, I may be saying number of things about Virat Kohli, I may be saying number of things about any particular famous personality, but that does not defame them. I am doing that in a personal space, in a closed space, right? Similarly, अगर मैं दिमाग में किसी के सोचूं कि यार ये आदमी तो बहुत ही मतलब एकदम खराब आदमी है, devil, right? Evil है. So that is not defamation. Defamation is if I come out in open, let's say if I make a statement which I know is false, which I know is untrue, to specifically with the intent of bringing down someone's image or disreputing someone, that is what is called as defamation. Do you understand that? So see, every person has a certain reputation in the society, and that depends upon the stature of that person also. So if you defame me, probably the charges that or the compensation that I may claim from you will be less as compared to if you defame, let's say, a Virat Kohli. If there is an article that comes out in the newspaper, let's say, which alleges that Virat Kohli has been involved in so and so extramarital affair, etc., and so forth, and then it says also that, you know, he has been involved in some sex racket, etc., all of those things. कुछ भी ऐसा random अगर मैंने mention किया, of course the reputation that he has, where he is also earning on the basis of that reputation. See, उसको endorsement किसी और चीज पे नहीं मिल रही है, उसकी reputation के basis पे ही मिल रही है. अगर उसको एक ad करने के लिए आधा मिनट के 50 करोड़ रुपया मिल रहा है, that is because of the reputation that he has earned in the society, that whatever he will be saying will be considered as important by a person, right? Or it will be given value by a person. Now, if I say something which brings down his image, which brings down his reputation, then of course he is going to suffer some kind of monetary damage, he is going to suffer some kind of damage on his career, etc. So that is what is called as defamation. Now, Indian constitution says that you have right to freedom of speech and expression, but you do not have right to defame someone. You can express yourself, but if there is a thing which you are stating which you know is false, देखिए कोई truth state करना defamation नहीं होता है. Let's say that Lalu Prasad Yadav is a criminal. He's a criminal. I am not saying this. Law and the court has said this. So if I write in the newspaper that he is a criminal who has been convicted by the court, I cannot be held liable in the court by Lalu Prasad Yadav for saying that he defamed me by calling me a criminal, because this is a fact, this is the truth. And I am stating it knowing that it is a fact and the truth. But if I know something is false and I express it in order to bring down someone's reputation deliberately, then that is what is called as defamation. So in India's legal system, there are two kinds of remedies that are available in case of a person being defamed by the other person. One is there is a civil remedy. So defamation के केस में दो तरीके की solution exist करते हैं. अगर आपको कोई defame करे, you can seek two kind of remedies. One is you can seek a civil remedy, okay, which is a case of civil defamation. तो आप एक civil suit file करके किसी एक आदमी से compensation मांग सकते हैं. You can ask for that person to compensate you for the damages that have been caused to your image by that person making some defamatory statement against you. Times Now ने एक, अब देखिए जर्नलिस्ट जो है इंडिया के अंदर, आपको पता ही है स्टैंडर्ड किस तरीके का है. व्हाट्सएप से पढ़ के वो अपनी न्यूज आइटम्स बनाते हैं, राइट? यही दिस इज द स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ जर्नलिज्म दैट हैज रीच्ड इन दिस कंट्री टुडे. सो टाइम्स नाउ वंस दे रैन अ न्यूज story where there was some allegation of corruption which was being investigated against a particular judge. तो and this was a judge of the Supreme Court of India. तो इन्होंने क्या किया, विदाउट रिसर्च चलाते हैं काम अपना ये लोग. तो दे ran story that so and so person has been alleged, so and so judge has been alleged of corruption and there is an inquiry taking place against him. Without doing a proper due diligence, they published photograph from some other judge. बेचारे किसी और की अभी देखा ना आपने थोड़े दिन पहले, वो एक और टाइम्स नाउ पे ही हुआ था शायद मेरे ख्याल से, वो किसी और को बोल रहा था, वो बोल रहा है भाई मेरे को तो मेरा तो नाम ही कुछ और है, मेरा ऐसे ही कुछ था ना, क्या नाम था उसका, मैक एडम्स है ना. वो बोल रहा है यार आई एम नॉट मैक एडम्स. So the point is, same way they ran a story where they ran image of some other judge of the Supreme Court alleging that this guy has been involved in corruption case और इसकी ऊपर corruption का एक charge investigate हो रहा है. अब now of course this is bringing that person into disrepute. उसको बेचारे को सब जगह से फोन आने लग गए कि सर देखो आपके बारे में क्या बातें हो रही हैं, क्या कर दिया आपने. बोल रहा है मैंने तो कुछ नहीं किया, इन्होंने बस गलत इमेज लगा दी, मेरी क्या गलती है इसमें. So he filed 100 crore rupees defamation suit against Times Now. Of course, भाई जज की रेपुटेशन है, उसने 30 साल काम किया है बेचारे ने. That person has reached the Supreme Court of India, working all through the years, slogging it hard, 30 years. He has got certain reputation. उसकी reputation है तभी तो वो जज है, वरना कोई क्यों सुनेगा उसकी. Now he has made this reputation and you took that reputation away in a matter of few seconds. So civil defamation suit was filed against Times Now where 100 crore rupees was claimed from them for affecting the image of the judge, right? So one is civil defamation where a suit can be filed, a civil suit can be filed for claiming compensation and damages for injuring the reputation of a person. ये civil law के अंदर एक remedy है, ठीक है. उसके अलावा इंडिया में जो आईपीसी है वो क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन भी lay down करता है, that a person can be held liable under the criminal law as well, where the offense of criminal defamation has been defined in section 499 and the punishment has been provided in section 500 of the IPC for criminal defamation. Now see, in India the problem is not with civil defamation, because civil defamation is something which is between two individuals. दो लोगों के बीच की लड़ाई है, उसमें स्टेट का कोई लेना देना नहीं है, राइट? As far as criminal defamation, criminal case में क्या होता है, that one party is state and the other party is the individual. एक crime और एक civil offense में फर्क ये होता है that in a civil offense you are causing damage to some other individual, not to the society. अगर दो भाइयों के बीच में प्रॉपर्टी का केस चल रहा है, इसमें सोसाइटी का क्या लेना देना, राइट? इट इज द डिस्प्यूट बिटवीन टू ब्रदर्स, feudal dispute between them over the property. So it will be a civil suit that will be decided, court and the state will be having a hands off approach. A criminal case is one where you are carrying out an act which is causing harm to the society. That is what is a criminal act or a criminal offense. जब आप किसी को murder करते हो, you are not only causing damage to that person and to his family, but you are causing the disharmony in the society as well. आप एक criminal भी बन जा रहे हो because you have affected the society as well. So in India the problem is that we have civil defamation is fine because all the democratic countries of the world have civil defamation way, because otherwise तो कोई किसी के बारे में कुछ भी बोलता फिरेगा and that will affect the reputation of people and their economic and monetary interests as well. The problem is with respect to criminal defamation. इंडिया में क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन को लेके बहुत डिबेट हुआ है that whether the provisions under section 499 and section 500 of the IPC that provide for criminal defamation, where people are saying that basically defamation is a criminal offense also, it's a crime against the society as well, is a problem, because most of the democratic countries of the world have done away with the criminal defamation laws. किसी भी डेमोक्रेटिक नेशन में आपको क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन, मैक्सिमम डेमोक्रेटिक नेशंस में आपको क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन के प्रोविजंस नहीं मिलेंगे, सिविल डिफेमेशन रूट होता है, बिकॉज पीपल आर सेइंग दैट सी इफ समवन हैज डिफेम्ड समवन, लेट टू ऑफ देम सेटल इट आउट. Why is the state getting involved into it and saying that this person is a criminal in the eyes of the law and he has committed a crime against the society by defaming someone? So questions have been raised. पहली बात तो हमें defamation समझ में आ गया. Second, we have understood there are two kind of defamation cases that can be instituted in India. One is civil defamation under the law of tort, and the second is the criminal defamation. Criminal defamation, as I just mentioned, is not there in the most of the democratic countries of the world today, because people believe that having a provision for criminal defamation is directly in violation of freedom of speech and expression. Lot of people believe that freedom of speech and expression gets unreasonably restricted by the criminal defamation provisions. People believe that criminal defamation provisions have been misused by the state and the powerful people in order to curb dissent. इसको dissent curb करने के लिए usually use किया जाता है. So if today someone makes an allegation that so and so minister of the government is involved in a case of corruption, then that person may institute a criminal defamation case also. देखो civil defamation में तो civil suit चलेगा, देखा जाएगा. Criminal defamation, the problem is that a person is declared as criminal in the eyes of the law for speaking something which he may actually hold as truth. So it may be used as a tool for curbing the legitimate dissent against those in power. And this has happened also. There are people, those who have instituted criminal defamation suits in order to curb dissent against the government, or in order to curb dissent against the rich and the powerful in the society. And see, the entire process of a criminal case being instituted against you itself is very harrowing. अगर आपके खिलाफ एक क्रिमिनल केस हो जाए तो आपके जो पूरा रिकॉर्ड है उसके ऊपर एक ब्लॉट लग जाता है कि आप, लेट्स से यू आर वांटिंग टू माइग्रेट टू सम अदर कंट्री, पहली चीज आपसे ये पूछी जाएगी आपके खिलाफ कोई क्रिमिनल केस तो नहीं है, या पास्ट में कोई क्रिमिनल केस तो नहीं रहा, बिकॉज यू आर नाउ क्रिमिनल फॉर सेइंग समथिंग. How can someone be criminal for saying something which is only disreputing someone? Is what the argument is given by some of the people, that there should be no criminal defamation provisions in the law. One. Secondly, people also believe that this criminal defamation provision is a violation of freedom of speech and expression, as it imposes an unreasonable restriction on the freedom of speech and and the freedom of speech and expression of a person. It imposes unreasonable restrictions on the same. Okay? So the point here is that whether criminal defamation should be held as constitutional or not. So a case came up in front of Supreme Court of India in 2006. Now you would know of Dr. Subramaniam Swamy. You know, he's infamous for making any kind of defamatory statements against people, left, right, center. भाई उन्होंने किसी को नहीं छोड़ा है, right? He has not left anyone. Let me tell you that. From Indira Gandhi to Nehru to Rajiv Gandhi to Atal Bihari Vajpayee to the present Prime Minister, he has not left anyone whom he may not have made defamatory statements against. तो इसीलिए he has a number of defamation cases also against him. Not just civil defamation suits, but criminal defamation cases also. So he went to the Supreme Court of India in 2006, Subramaniam Swamy versus Union of India, where he pleaded in front of the court that, sir, this criminal defamation provision is unconstitutional in nature. It is violative of the freedom of speech and expression. It is imposing unreasonable restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression. It is declaring a person to be criminal for defaming someone, on the grounds of defaming someone, which is stretching the law way too far. Other thing which he says is that, sir, most of the democratic countries of the world have anyway done away with the criminal defamation provisions in their constitution or in their legal books. Why are we still continuing with such a provision in India's constitution? Why do we have such a provision? Please declare it as unconstitutional and violative of 19(2) because it amounts to unreasonable restriction on the freedom of speech and expression. वो बोलता है कि सर डिफेमेशन करने से क्या किसी आदमी का क्या पब्लिक ऑर्डर अफेक्ट होता है? क्या डिफेमेशन करने से सॉवरेनिटी इन इंडिया अफेक्ट होती है? डज इट अफेक्ट द सिक्योरिटी ऑफ द स्टेट? डज इट अफेक्ट फॉरेन friendly relation with the foreign state? No. Because of that, he says that, sir, criminal defamation provision should be struck down by the court, and that is the argument which he makes. But the court does not agree to his contentions. The court upheld the constitutional validity of section 499 and section 500 of the IPC. That is the criminal defamation provisions. The arguments that were given by the court were that, see, as far as section 499 and 500 are concerned, first and foremost, defamation has been provided as a ground under Article 19(2), on the basis of which freedom of speech and expression can be curbed. So you can't say it is unreasonable restriction. Second, as far as defamation is concerned, if there are some people in the society, those who have got into a habit of defaming other individuals, so such a law is required for such individuals. So basically court is telling कि तुम्हारे जैसों के लिए required है ये क्योंकि तुम जो है हर किसी के खिलाफ कुछ भी बोलते रहते हो, राइट? किसी के खिलाफ कुछ भी लिखते रहते हो, तो तुम्हारी ये आदत बन गई है. सो इन ऑर्डर टू कर्ब दिस टेंडेंसी ऑफ योर्स वेयर यू आर डिफेमिंग समवन एंड trying to bring disrepute to someone, it has become a habit for you. That is why this law is there in place, so that people do not get encouraged to keep doing this thing again and again. The third thing that the court says is that, see, we agree that there is a possibility of misuse of criminal defamation provisions. But simply because there is a probability of misuse of some provision, that does not mean that we should hold that law as unconstitutional. They say that so many laws can be misused, but that does not mean that we should not have a law in the first place, right? So on the basis of these particular justifications, and then the court says that, see, criminal defamation, फिर court guidelines भी issue करती है that कि criminal defamation, क्योंकि changes have been made to the section 499 of the IPC, if truth can be taken as a ground for saving yourself from a criminal defamation case. अगर आप कोर्ट में ये प्रूफ कर दें कि मैंने तो केवल फैक्ट या ट्रूथ स्टेट किया था, अब उससे वो आदमी डिफेम हो रहा हो या नहीं हो रहा, मेरा क्या लेना देना इससे, राइट? इफ द कोर्ट हैज सेड दैट दिस पर्सन इज करप्ट और मैंने अगर अपने न्यूज़पेपर में ये लिख दिया कि जी ये करप्ट पॉलिटिशियन है या करप्ट ब्यूरोक्रेट है, तो मैंने क्या गलत किया? मैंने तो वही लिखा ना जो कोर्ट ने बोला है. So truth can be used as a defense in case of criminal defamation cases. So we therefore believe that there is already a restricted application of the criminal defamation provisions, and one cannot say that it amounts to unreasonable restriction. But see, having said that, there still continues to linger on a debate in India. And your conclusion in any such question where if UPSC asks you critically analyze the constitutionality of criminal defamation provisions in Indian law, so in that case you will give all these arguments for and against, but finally you should say that, see, when most of the democratic countries of the world have done away with this provision, India should also seriously think that whether we need such a law or not. Secondly, in India, the criminal justice system is heavily loaded in the favor of the rich and the powerful. And therefore, the rich and the powerful have the tendency to misuse this provision to intimidate people, so that people can shut up about them. So, and plus in any case, civil defamation route is available. So when civil defamation provision is available, why do you need to make it and continue it as a crime? So in your conclusion, you should mention that I am not suggesting you that you should write for or against. That is your opinion. But at least you should give this outlook to the examiner that I personally believe that the state should at least have a reconsideration, and we should have a larger debate in the Indian society. We should probably relook at the provisions that whether we need such a stringent law in place or not, and whether the civil defamation route itself can be enough to take care of the defamation cases. Is that clear? So that is what we need to keep in mind. So see, similarly, छोटे छोटे ऐसे issues हैं. Sedition law, section 124A of the IPC, right? Similarly, contempt of the court. तो इन छोटी छोटी चीजों के ऊपर हम डिस्कस करेंगे. So please write down about defamation. What do we mean and understand by defamation? So defamation refers to bringing someone into disrepute. Defamation refers to bringing someone into disrepute by making false statements, false statement, either written or spoken, Now please write down what is not defamation. अगर आप सेक्शन 499 पढ़ेंगे तो वो डिफाइन भी करता है क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन को. एनी फॉल्स कम्युनिकेशन either written or spoken that can harm a person's reputation or decrease the respect, regard or confidence of a person, or induces a disparaging or a hostile or disagreeable opinion or feeling against a person is known as defamation. ठीक है. Now what is not defamation? Please write down. Mere insult or statements that hurt the feelings of a person. Mere insult or statements that hurt the feeling of a person, to whom they are addressed, do not constitute defamation. Full stop. Therefore, if a teacher calls a student lazy, as lazy, or an employer admonishes an employee for coming late, the same would not fall under defamation. Same would not fall under defamation as an offense as per section 499, as per section 499 of IPC. As per section 499 of IPC. So it would not fall under the definition of defamation as an offense under section 499 of IPC. ठीक है? Now, please write down why Supreme Court upheld criminal defamation. Why Supreme Court upheld criminal defamation? So, पहला आर्ग्यूमेंट जो कोर्ट देती है, रेपुटेशन ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल अंडर आर्टिकल 21 is an equally important right as freedom of speech. So if you read article 21, it states that under article 21 it is an equally important right as freedom of speech. तो कोर्ट ये बोल रही है कि देखिए, we agree that criminal defamation may be imposing restriction on the freedom of speech and expression, but what about article 21? जब किसी आदमी को डिफेम किया जा रहा है तो उसका राइट टू लिव विद डिग्निटी भी अफेक्ट हो रहा है, एंड आर्टिकल 21 प्रोवाइड्स राइट टू लाइफ. So right to life and right to live with dignity is getting affected when a person is being disreputed. So you can't justify defamation on the grounds that article 19(1)(a) is there, because article 21 भी तो है. ठीक है? Second, please write down. Criminalization of defamation to protect individual dignity. Criminalization of defamation to protect individual dignity and reputation is a reasonable restriction. तो कोर्ट ये कहती है it is a reasonable restriction. Criminalization of defamation to protect individual dignity and reputation is a reasonable restriction. तो कोर्ट 21 को यूज करके 21 को यूज करके जस्टिफाई करती है कि क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन में कोई गड़बड़ नहीं है, बिकॉज इट इज प्रोटेक्टिंग रेपुटेशन ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल. सो एक फंडामेंटल राइट के बेसिस के ऊपर कोर्ट डिफाइंस द रिस्ट्रिक्शन ऑन द अदर फंडामेंटल राइट. ओके, नाउ प्लीज राइट डाउन नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. इट हैज बीन पार्ट ऑफ स्टैट्यूटरी लॉ फॉर ओवर 70 years. It has been part of statutory law for over 70 years and has neither diluted our vibrant democracy nor abridged the free speech. थोड़ी राइटिंग स्पीड बढ़ाइए अपनी, बिकॉज आई कैन सी सम ऑफ यू आर स्लो एट राइटिंग, बिकॉज इट विल क्रिएट ट्रबल फॉर यू इन द एग्जाम इफ यू हैपन टू राइट द मेंस एग्जाम. UPSC expects you to write around 25 to 30 words per minute. एक 250 वर्ड के आंसर को 10 मिनट में आंसर करना होता है, और उसके अंदर 10 मिनट में आपके पास वही समय है जो क्वेश्चन पढ़ने का भी है, सोचने का भी है, आंसर फ्रेम करने का भी है और आंसर लिखने का भी है. समझ रहे हैं? तो स्पीड बढ़ाइए, और स्पीड बढ़ाने का कोई और तरीका नहीं है. यहां पे तेज लिखिए जल्दी, जितना लिखेंगे उतना ही आपकी स्पीड बढ़ेगी राइटिंग की, और कोई तरीका नहीं है इसको इंप्रूव करने का दुनिया में. ठीक है? नाउ नेक्स्ट. सो कोर्ट बेसिकली सेज दैट सी our vibrant democracy continues as it is. You can't say that defamation provisions have affected the freedom of speech in India. We still continue with it. So therefore we don't hold that it is unconstitutional. Further, court says mere misuse or abuse of law cannot be a reason. Mere misuse or abuse of law cannot be a reason to hold a law as unconstitutional. to hold a law as unconstitutional. Mere misuse or abuse of law cannot be a reason to hold a law as unconstitutional. तो कोर्ट कहती है कि यार केवल बिकॉज एक लॉ का मिसयूज होने की प्रोबेबिलिटी है, यू शुड नॉट डिक्लेयर इट एज अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल. रादर जो अथॉरिटीज हैं, पुलिस है, उनको सेंसिटाइज कीजिए कि वो सेक्शन 66A जैसे कहीं पे भी लेफ्ट राइट सेंटर लोगों को अरेस्ट ना करते फिरें. Right? Only when there is such a statement which has been made which can really affect public order, then or very serious statement has been made, criminal defamation should be brought in. Authorities themselves should be sparingly using such provisions. And last point लिख लीजिए, monetary compensation in civil defamation. Monetary compensation in civil defamation is not proportional. Monetary compensation in civil defamation is not proportional to the excessive harm done to reputation. To the excessive harm done to reputation. तो किसी आदमी की जो रेपुटेशन अफेक्ट होती है, केवल मॉनेटरी कॉम्पेंसेशन इनफ नहीं है. In certain cases, even a criminal case should be instituted, especially against those people, those who are in the habit of doing this. You know, there are people, those who are in the habit of making allegations and then running away. कुछ भी allegation लगा दो किसी पे और फिर भाग जाओ, फिर उसके बाद डिफेंड करने के लिए कोई नहीं. बट आपने स्टेटमेंट छोड़ दी, ठीक है, उसके बाद वो जो इंस्टीट्यूट है, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, वो जो इंडिविजुअल है, वो सफर करता रहे. राइट? विच इज कॉल्ड एज बेसिकली शूट एंड स्कूट. ठीक है, किसी के ऊपर गोली मारी और भाग जाओ. अब आप निपटते रहो उससे जिसने जो बोल दिया. राइट? टुमारो सम स्टेटमेंट कम्स अबाउट मी, समवन मेक्स, होता ही है आजकल, चल ही रहा है ये सब. समवन विल मेक अ स्टेटमेंट अबाउट मी, कोई क्लिप कर देगा आज कोई कहीं से वीडियो मेरी, फिर डाल देगा, बोलेगा देखो ये क्या बोल रहे हैं, नेशनल एंथम. समझ रहे हो? यही तो होता है, यही तो हुआ. जियोवाज विटनेस केस ही एक्सप्लेन कर रहा था सर मैं. किसी ने बोला ये देखो बोल रहे हैं भारत माता की जय नहीं बोलेंगे. हैं? मैंने थोड़ी ना बोला है यार, जिसकी जो मर्जी जो बोलो नहीं बोलो, मेरे को जबरदस्ती मत बुलवाओ. सिंपल सी बात है, मेरी भी तो मर्जी है यार, मेरा नहीं मन आज बोलने का. तो व्हाट, रोज थोड़ी ना बोलूंगा मैं खड़े होके छत के ऊपर अपनी चिल्ला के. ठीक है, सो दिस इज द पॉइंट. नाउ प्लीज राइट डाउन आर्ग्यूमेंट्स इन फेवर ऑफ decriminalization of defamation. Arguments in favor of decriminalization of defamation. Arguments in favor of decriminalization of defamation. And see, इसके ऊपर लॉ कमीशन ने रिपोर्ट दिया है अपना, और लॉ कमीशन ने भी इसमें आर्ग्यूमेंट्स बताए हैं. ठीक है, सो दीज आर सम ऑफ द आर्ग्यूमेंट्स व्हिच हैव बीन मेड. सो प्लीज राइट डाउन. फर्स्ट, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन, FOSSI, is important for a vibrant democracy. Freedom of speech and expression is important for a vibrant democracy. And the threat of prosecution alone is enough to suppress the truth. तो केवल अगर आप किसी आदमी को धमका दो, मत बोल मेरे खिलाफ वरना क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन केस फाइल कर दूंगा, दैट इज एनफ टू सप्रेस समवन फ्रॉम स्पीकिंग द ट्रूथ ऑल्सो. देखो, आई टोल्ड यू दैट ट्रूथ कैन बी अ डिफेंस इन केसेस ऑफ क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन, बट अंडरस्टैंड दिस थिंग. आई मेक अ स्टेटमेंट, यू इंस्टीट्यूट अ क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन सूट अगेंस्ट मी. नाउ वेदर आई स्टेटेड ट्रूथ और नॉट, ये तो कोर्ट में डिटरमिन होगा, बट तब तक तो आपने मेरे को क्रिमिनल डिक्लेयर कर ही दिया है. एंड जो मेरा हरासमेंट होने वाला है, द हरासमेंट दैट इज गोइंग टू बी कॉस्ट टू मी एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ अ क्रिमिनल केस बीइंग इंस्टीट्यूटेड अगेंस्ट मी, व्हाट अबाउट दैट? दैट इज वेयर द रियल प्रॉब्लम लाइज विद क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन. सिविल डिफेमेशन में तो ठीक है, तुमने सिविल सूट फाइल किया है, कोई इशू नहीं है, देखेंगे कोर्ट में, लेट्स सी. बट क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन में तो आपने मेरे को क्रिमिनली डिक्लेयर कर दिया है. दैट इज वेयर द प्रॉब्लम इज. एंड इन इंडिया the state of things is such that we ideally treat that innocent until proven guilty, but in India we assume otherwise. We believe guilty until proven innocent. यही तो है भाई. अर्नब गोस्वामी sitting on his news channel is making allegations against people left, right and center and saying कि इसने ये कर दिया, उसने अपनी बीवी का मर्डर कर दिया, ये कर. That's why Shashi Tharoor went to the court. He said that what is he saying? Has the court declared me? See, you have to understand one thing. You may hold whatever opinion, but court का भी तो कुछ importance है कि नहीं है. आप अपनी मर्जी से किसी भी आदमी को innocent और guilty declare कर देते हो कोर्ट में on your news channel. One day, all of these news channels ganged up against this poor, what the वो क्या होता है बस में कौन होता है कंडक्टर ऑफ रायन इंटरनेशनल स्कूल, सेइंग कि इसने मार दिया स्टूडेंट को और पूरी दुनिया के अंदर इन्होंने उसको डिफेम कर दिया. आप उस आदमी की मनोस्थिति सोचिए. अंडरस्टैंड हिज सिचुएशन. व्हाट इज ही गोइंग थ्रू, व्हाट इज हिज फैमिली गोइंग थ्रू. Whereas later on it turns out, अब आपने अपनी कोर्ट बना ली न्यूज चैनल पे चला के, you have declared someone as guilty. That is where the problem is, right? With criminal defamation, that is the problem, that you can criminally intimidate a person by saying anything. That is by instituting a criminal defamation suit against them. So that is one. Second point, please write down. Every dissent and criticism may be cited as a case of defamation. See, because it is very difficult to draw the boundary line between insult and defamation, केस तो बन जाएगा आपके खिलाफ. अब आप उसको कोर्ट में प्रूव करते रहो कि वो डिफेमेशन है कि नहीं है. आप बस लड़ते रहो कोर्ट में. दैट इज वेयर द प्रॉब्लम इज. और देखिए, जो आदमी क्रिमिनल डिफेमेशन का केस फाइल कर रहा है, उसके बाद वो साइड हट जाता है. अब स्टेट और आपके बीच में लड़ाई है. सिविल डिफेमेशन सूट में उस आदमी की भी उतनी ही प्रॉब्लम है, बिकॉज ही विल ऑल्सो हैव टू गो टू द कोर्ट. क्रिमिनल केस में क्या है, मैंने आपके खिलाफ एफआईआर फाइल कर दी, एक बार कंप्लेंट हो गया, मेरे से एक आधी बार स्टेटमेंट बुलाने के लिए मेरे को आई विल बी कॉल्ड टू द कोर्ट और आई विल बी कॉल्ड टू द पुलिस स्टेशन. दैट्स इट. आफ्टर दैट द स्टेट विल डील विद यू. That is where the problem with criminal defamation is. Next, please write down. The process itself becomes a punishment. The process itself becomes a punishment. The process itself becomes a punishment when civil remedy is already available. Next, it goes against the global trend. Goes against the global trend of decriminalizing defamation. It goes against the global trend of decriminalizing defamation. It goes against the global trend of decriminalizing defamation. And the last point, please write down. In 2011, the Human Rights Committee of ICCP, International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, ICCP. In 2011, the Human Rights Committee of ICCP called upon the states matlab state with a capital S, called upon the states to abolish criminal defamation, noting that it intimidates citizens, and makes them shy away from exposing the wrongdoings and makes them shy away from exposing the wrongdoings. Okay? So these are the arguments for and against that can be provided by you in your mains answer if a question is asked related to defamation. UPSC may ask you, what do you understand by defamation? Can defamation be a ground for imposing reasonable restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression? And do you think, or they may ask you, critically analyze the provisions, criminal provisions related to defamation under Indian law. Is that clear to everyone? Yes, any questions? Yes, sir.
What about the member of parliament? Because they have a freedom of speech according to the constitutional provisions, but they are also not liable to any proceedings.
So, interesting question, and we will discuss more about that also. I'll just repeat the question. See, he says that what about the freedom of speech and expression that has been provided to the member of parliament, and they have been provided certain immunities. Article 105 of the Indian Constitution provides the parliamentarians and the legislators in the state legislature in India to express themselves freely and to act in such a manner where they cannot be held criminally liable for anything said or done in the parliament or in the house in pursuance of their duties as a parliamentarian or as a legislator. So first and foremost, this is an exception to right to freedom of speech and expression. ये एक exception है, ठीक है? क्यों है exception? क्योंकि legislature में तो लोगों को आजादी होनी चाहिए to express themselves openly. Otherwise, then how will democracy function? Because everyone will then keep making criminal defamation cases against each other in the parliament also. But then, how do we balance right to freedom of speech and expression versus this power that has been provided, privileges that have been provided to the parliamentarians? So we will discuss about that when we will discuss about Article 105 of the Indian Constitution and the various privileges and immunities that have been provided to the parliamentarians and the legislators in India. Yes, any other questions? किसी को कुछ समझ नहीं आया? Because see, I'll be leaving after the class. I have a class at the other center. तो अभी पूछ लीजिए. Any question, any doubt, any difficulty? Now see, one more thing, because one student has asked this. I know that I am already exceeding the time. I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk about this. That how do we prepare this subject? Now see, we have entered class number 13. अब हमें करना क्या है? क्लास में ठीक है, समझ में आ रहा है या नहीं आ रहा है, पता नहीं, जो भी है, ठीक है? So how do we now ensure that our preparation is well rounded for the exam? First and foremost, जो भी क्लास में कवर हो रहा है, कोशिश कीजिएगा कि पहले से क्लास में आप थोड़ा पढ़ के आए, थोड़ा सा पढ़ के आए, एटलीस्ट बेसिक प्रोविजन पढ़ के आए, लक्ष्मीकांत पढ़ के आ जाए. लक्ष्मीकांत में कुछ नहीं है ऐसा कि जो आप खुद से पढ़ के नहीं आ सकते. तो अब नेक्स्ट क्लास में जब आप आएंगे, it is your responsibility that you should have read Article 19 properly from Lakshmikant or from your value added material. You should have read Article 20, 21 of the Constitution. At least थोड़ा सा पढ़ के आएंगे, एक आइडिया होना चाहिए कि है क्या, तभी आपको क्लास में बेटर समझ में आएगा. So that is the first thing that we need to do. Second thing which we need to do is, of course, attend the class attentively, because basic concepts related to Constitution, I assure you, there will be nothing which will be left untouched. You will have absolute clarity on constitutional provision. वो मेरी guarantee है. For that matter, after you attend the class and you go back and read a book such as Lakshmikant, you will find that ये तो हलवा है, right? वो आपको लगेगा यार तो बहुत सिंपल है, इसमें तो कुछ लिखा ही नहीं, इसमें तो बस इतना ही लिखा है, राइट टू फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन, उसमें एक दो लाइनें और लिख दी, बस खत्म बात. सो वी आर हैविंग अ डिटेल्ड डिस्कशन ऑन दीज टॉपिक्स, so वो एनीवे बहुत आसान हो जाएगा. अब तीसरी चीज क्या करनी है? Third thing that we have to do is that we have to revise whatever has been discussed in the class, and then topic by topic pick up questions from previous year prelims as well as mains and try to solve them. Try to write answers, try to attempt the objective questions that have been asked, whatever topics as we are covering in the class. Fifth thing that you need to do is जो आपका value added material है, in that there are previous year questions provided with model answers about the UPS from the Vision IS test series. So please go through those questions also. That will also help you in developing an understanding of, first and foremost, how are answers supposed to be written. Second, it will also give you a clue as to what are some of the things that we need to understand in addition to what has been taught in the class. Because see, in class it's not possible for me to cover everything under the sun. ऐसा possible नहीं है. Because let's say अब article 25 की बात होती है. I will discuss maybe Shabrimala case. I may discuss one triple talaq case. I may discuss one or two things. But I can't discuss everything that is happening. Plus things are also evolving. Class खत्म हो जाएगी, उसके बाद फिर something else will come up. Let's say अब हिजाब केस भी जो है उसको भी शबरीमाला जजमेंट के साथ, और जो दाऊदी बोरा कम्युनिटी का केस है, और बहुत सारे मॉस्क एंट्री केस है, उन सबको एक साथ डाला जाएगा. All of these will be put together and now will be considered together by the court in the review petition. Ultimately होगा यही. Supreme Court ये मैटर जाके भी Supreme Court will uphold the contention of the High Court is what my belief is. So my point here is that things will keep evolving. तो वो आपको खुद से करना पड़ेगा. Current affairs से linkage फिर topics को. If you do these things in this stepwise manner, believe me, there will be no difficulty at all in getting through prelims examination and even writing good answers in the mains, given you have practiced answer writing. And then another important thing, if you can and which you should, is that apart from reading your Lakshmikant, you should read, because देखो लक्ष्मीकांत में तो जो है ना वो हम वैसे ही क्लास में बेसिक उससे बहुत ज्यादा आगे कवर कर रहे हैं. बट एनसीईआरटी जो है, दैट इज वेरी क्रूशियल, बिकॉज जो असली अंडरस्टैंडिंग सब्जेक्ट की अगर आपको बनानी है, कंसेप्चुअल क्लैरिटी, दैट विल कम थ्रू रीडिंग ऑफ द एनसीईआरटीज. उसमें जिस तरीके से कॉन्सेप्ट्स एक्सप्लेन किए हैं ना, इतनी सिंपल लैंग्वेज में एग्जांपल्स दे देकर, वो आपको दुनिया की किसी किताब में नहीं मिलेगा. सो रीड एनसीईआरटीज diligently and spend time with them. That is what you need to do, right? And of course notes etc and all of those things are given to you. प्लस वैल्यू एडेड मटेरियल को भी देखिएगा, बिकॉज मैं सारी चीजें क्लास में डिस्कस नहीं कर पाऊंगा, पॉसिबल नहीं है वो. सो प्लीज कीप लुकिंग एट दी वैल्यू एडेड मटेरियल ऑल्सो एज वी गो अलोंग इन द क्लास. सो नेक्स्ट क्लास से पहले आपकी ड्यूटी होनी चाहिए, आपके वैल्यू एडेड मटेरियल में सेडिशन के रिलेटेड लिखा हुआ है, पढ़ के आइएगा. आपके वैल्यू एडेड मटेरियल में कंटेम्प्ट ऑफ कोर्ट के रिलेटेड लिखा हुआ है, उसको पढ़ के आइएगा. इन योर वैल्यू एडेड मटेरियल दी वेरियस things related to freedom of speech and expression have been mentioned, उनको पढ़ के आइएगा next class से पहले. It will definitely help you absorbing more in the class. Is that clear? Any questions? Okay, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next class. And happy Holi. Bye-bye.